The man appears to be a hunter who could crush S-class opponents with one hand. But in reality, he's an alien who only wants to retire. Little Green was once the strongest magician on a magical civilization planet, but one day he suddenly had a thought to quit this miserable job. His society provided free services, meaning he would never earn a single penny no matter how hard he worked. Worse still, due to advanced technology, they never needed to eat, drink, or sleep, remaining on call 24 hours a day. At his young age, he developed overtime poisoning syndrome, unable to remember when he last finished work on time. He desperately wanted to leave, but due to his critical responsibilities, he couldn't resign freely. The high-ranking officials, to prevent his escape, placed restrictions on him. For instance, when he attempted teleportation, his head would receive electric shocks. Even if he managed to escape, there was nowhere to hide on the planet. He also considered eliminating his superiors, but unfortunately, he couldn't attack anyone from his own planet. Furthermore, he couldn't even commit suicide. Just when his mind was filled with thoughts of resignation, a sudden inspiration struck him. Though his body was bound by magic, his soul remained free. Because in this world, no magic existed that could control souls. In other words, if he abandoned his body and escaped with just his soul, it might work. For 10 years, Little Green struggled between perseverance and surrender. After countless attempts, he finally completed a unique magic: soul control. He would separate his soul from his body, then escape to a planet where no one could find him. At the moment his consciousness left his body, he couldn't help but rejoice. Success! Success! I truly am a genius. Finally, I can leave this miserable place. Let's see how you bastards manage without me. Thus, filled with excitement about his resignation, Little Green arrived at a blue planet deep in the universe. When he opened his eyes again, he had become a human. From then on, he was the protagonist. Although it felt somewhat unfamiliar at first, Little Green was satisfied with this outcome. After all, he had successfully retired, hadn't he? Next, he sensed the condition of this body, then prepared to access the original owner's memories to seamlessly integrate into this society. He wanted to disguise himself so perfectly that even this body's parents wouldn't notice. The plan was perfect, but reality proved harsh. The body's memories were fragmented and discontinuous, impossible to recall. Meanwhile, a sudden sharp pain surged through his abdomen, as waves of acid rose from his stomach. Damn it, this body was actually starving to death. Before coming, he had only thought about finding a species with the highest intelligence and a body with the highest magical power, but overlooked the body's current condition, a major oversight. To survive, he needed to quickly eat something to fill his stomach, so he struggled to stand up and walked outside. Then he saw sunlight for the first time. His homeland surface was mostly liquid, a dark place without sunlight. Now a colorful world appeared before his eyes. Both the warm sunshine and fresh air enchanted him. He truly wanted to savor this moment, if only he weren't starving to death. But why was there nothing edible around? This won't do, he'll really starve to death at this rate. Just then the protagonist finally found something edible. Though the little creature wasn't big, now wasn't the time to be picky. So the cockroach was confusedly grabbed and brought closer to a gaping mouth. At this critical moment, a small boy passed by the protagonist. Looking at what was in the boy's mouth, the protagonist instantly felt his cockroach was no longer appetizing and casually tossed it aside. Now an important question arose. To steal or not to steal? Never mind, let's follow him first. So the protagonist tailed him. The small boy noticed someone following him, turned around and was frightened by the person. The next moment, without any hesitation, he turned and ran, completely ignoring the protagonist's pleas to wait. Eventually, the small boy successfully escaped with high dexterity, while the protagonist found himself in an unfamiliar place. Fortunately, there were several ornamental plants, though they didn't look particularly edible, but the protagonist couldn't afford to be choosy anymore. However, at that moment, a rumbling sound suddenly came from the distance, accompanied by a child's scream. It was that small boy. Though uncertain what happened, the protagonist decided to go check. The small boy was now trembling as he looked ahead, because a giant bird stood before him. Monster. Following the sound, the protagonist saw a giant bird chasing the small boy. Surprisingly, on his first day on Earth, he encountered such a monster on the street. What a wretched world this is. However, the protagonist quickly changed his mind. In some ways, this might be fortunate. According to the residual memories of this body, birds were incredibly delicious. Mere monsters were nothing to a great magician. Once he adapted to the magical power, conquering this planet wouldn't be an issue. Just then, he suddenly noticed his body surrounded by glowing lights. This sensation of every cell being scanned was magical power. But what about this quantity? It was far too abundant. If the magical power in his homeland only reached his feet, then the magical power here was like falling into a swimming pool. At this moment, the protagonist felt energized. In such a magically rich place, he would be omnipotent. Just then, the small boy ran to the protagonist seeking help. Such matters were mere trifles for the great magician. However, the protagonist had one condition. He wanted what the boy held. Although the small boy seemed reluctant, hearing the commotion behind him, he immediately prioritized, take it, please save me. Transaction complete, the protagonist told the small boy to hide behind him. Then struck a pose, intending to separate the monster's flesh from its bones with a wave of his hand. But after waiting, nothing happened. The small boy now looked at the protagonist as if he were an idiot. The protagonist was also puzzled. What's going on? Could it be that I am too nervous because I just arrived here? Seeing the protagonist's empty bravado, the cautious small boy promptly fled. Meanwhile, the protagonist continued various attempts. Explosion, fire spirit, curse, he tried all kinds of magic, only to reach one conclusion: this body couldn't use magic. Accepting reality, the protagonist began a frantic escape, running and shouting for help. Unfortunately, despite being on a busy street, no one came to assist. And strangely, the monster seemed fixated only on him. His already hungry body now reached its limit. Seeing he couldn't outrun the pursuer on the main road, the protagonist abruptly changed direction. The monster, not to be outdone, similarly made a sharp turn. Worse still, the monster suddenly remembered it could fly. Watching the giant bird diving towards him, the protagonist felt he might perish on his first day of transmigration. At this critical moment, his knee even twisted. In that instant, he seemed to see the Grim Reaper. The next moment, momentum carried him sprawling to the ground, while the giant bird flew directly over his head, followed by a series of fatal tumbles. Finally, the monster's massive beak slammed into a wall. The protagonist, watching feathers flutter through the air, couldn't immediately comprehend what had happened. Then he approached to check. Looking at the motionless massive body, he fell into contemplation. Did it kill itself by crashing into the wall? Was this creature an idiot? He really wanted to ask Earth scholars how such a stupid creature evolved. But now wasn't the time for such thoughts. The protagonist, rubbing his flattened stomach, drooled uncontrollably. This bird should be edible, right? After all, being organisms from the same planet, their physical components were similar. However, before he could figure out how to begin eating, he suddenly heard sounds from behind. The protagonist turned to see a sharp-dressed professional woman before him. It turned out the small boy had loyally gone for help. Xuan Yuyan was a professional hunter, so she knew what the monster was. Ficino SS was a bird species, living in spatial gates in desert regions, possessing speed comparable to missiles. No hunter below C-class could match it. Therefore, to prevent numerous casualties, she needed to eliminate it quickly. However, when she arrived, this was the scene she encountered. At this moment, she doubted her perception. Did he defeat it alone? Just then, the small boy and a police officer also arrived. The officer approached to thank the protagonist for capturing the monster, while Xuan Yuyan knelt to examine the monster's cause of death, which appeared to be killed head-on. Could this man be a C-class or higher hunter? The protagonist cared about nothing else. Upon seeing the small boy, he had forgotten everything else. He extended one hand, looking seriously at the boy. "You haven't forgotten our agreement, have you?" Hearing this, the small boy, though reluctant, handed over the item to the protagonist. The protagonist drank it without hesitation. At that moment, he finally felt alive again. Xuan Yuyan watched this scene speechlessly. Is he stealing candy from a child? But she said nothing. Xuan Yuyan extended her hand, expressing gratitude to the protagonist. Then the protagonist shamelessly grabbed her hand with his own, covered in unknown fluid. Xuan Yuyan instantly felt defiled and, disregarding politeness, pulled out a tissue to wipe her hand. Simultaneously, she asked him to show his hunter's license, as she needed to report to the association. But the protagonist had never even heard of such a thing, so he made up an excuse, saying he didn't have it at the moment. Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan didn't say much, just asked for his name so she could check through the hunter system. Unexpectedly, the protagonist looked guilty, as he didn't even know the body's name. Seeing his expression, Xuan Yuyan first fell silent, then asked incredulously, "Have you not registered as a hunter? What about the awakening test? You should know that using abilities at will without registration is illegal." The protagonist couldn't understand what she was saying, but he knew things were getting awkward. So he lied that of course he had registered, he just left his hunter's license at home. Then he asked her to wait there while he went home to get it. Without waiting for her response, he turned and left, while secretly deciding never to take this route again. Back home, the protagonist easily found his ID card. But no matter how hard he searched, he couldn't find a hunter's license. Unsurprisingly, the original owner hadn't registered. He also discovered some unknown items at home, and just then he realized the original owner was even a smoker. At this moment, the protagonist nearly died of anger. Smoking was a major taboo for magicians. Since magicians needed to sense and absorb external magical power through their respiratory system, such self-harming actions to the lungs were unimaginable to them. No wonder this body couldn't use magic. The protagonist now regretted not filtering out flawed bodies, but he quickly recovered. After all, he had gone through countless hardships to escape. He couldn't give up over such small matters. A happy, fulfilling life awaited him. Then, just hours after arriving on Earth, he was arrested, because when he went out again, he was starving. He had a hard time sniffing around and finding a restaurant with a full meal, only to be arrested for dining and dashing since he had no money. Fortunately, a police officer recognized him as the hunter who had resolved the monster incident and let him off. The protagonist deeply thanked the officer for the help, bowed in gratitude and prepared to leave. Before departing, the officer handed him a flyer. It turned out the officer could tell the protagonist hadn't registered as a hunter, so kindly reminded him to go to the Hunters Association for a free awakening test, though the protagonist still didn't know what awakening was. Seeing the officer's expression, This must be common knowledge for Earth people. So he decided to check it out first. Then he remembered, the original owner had been here before, but the original owner had only awakened at the lowest F-class level. Realizing this, the protagonist felt as if struck by lightning. While the protagonist was stunned, he was suddenly interrupted by a voice. It was Xuan Yuyan, who had finished dealing with the monster and returned to the association and happened to see the protagonist. She wondered why the protagonist was here, and also wanted to check his hunter's license. The protagonist then recalled that he had just lied to her about going home to get his license. Fortunately, having recovered some memories, the protagonist apologized and admitted he had lied. He actually didn't have a hunter's license, and Xuan Yuyan was speechless. "No wonder I waited so long and you never came back." The protagonist then explained he had already taken the awakening test, but his level was too low to apply for a hunter's license. Xuan Yuyan was confused, while the protagonist proudly declared, "I'm F-class!" Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan was shocked. "What? Then how did you defeat Ficino SS?" The protagonist replied that the stupid bird died by crashing into a wall. The answer was so bizarre that silence fell over the atmosphere. Though not impossible, why didn't Xuan Yuyan quite believe it? After all, looking at his expression at that time, it was like looking at insects, not the demeanor an F-class weakling should have. But if he was lying, why would he hide his abilities? Usually only dangerous elements do that. Could this person be one of them? The perplexed Xuan Yuyan forced a smile and said, "You're lucky. Ficino SS isn't the brightest." Seeing her forced smile, the protagonist instantly understood Earth people express emotions by controlling facial muscles. This was something he needed to learn. And then the protagonist's lips slowly curved upward. "Yes, I'm really lucky." This smile, no matter how you looked at it, was full of criminal intent, leaving Xuan Yuyan dumbfounded. This guy definitely has issues. Better leave safely first. But before that, she took out a bill from her pocket and handed it to the protagonist. Little Green, receiving payment for the first time in his life, was overjoyed. What a generous person. But he was curious why. Xuan Yuyan explained it was his share from the Ficino SS corpse. Unexpectedly, the creature could be sold for money. The protagonist was so excited that tears flowed from the corners of his mouth. He didn't understand why the bird was so valuable. Was it the feathers? Little did he know the real value lay in the magic core. One C-class magic core was worth 2 million. The protagonist couldn't ignore this information and immediately questioned why he only received 50,000. Xuan Yuyan explained helplessly that the damage caused during the monster fight was compensated under her name, and if a certain person hadn't run away, he could have been exempted from hunter liability. At this moment, the protagonist felt a pain in his chest and apologized to her embarrassedly. Xuan Yuyan seemed to hear something incredible. Then she turned and left, saying as she walked, "It's fine, have a pleasant afternoon." Watching her departing figure, the protagonist gripped the bill tightly. Who would have thought that what was as annoying as flies on his home planet was worth 2 million here? To enjoy life on Earth, he needed a large sum of money. At this moment, the protagonist resolved to become a hunter. Honestly, until just then, he couldn't see his future clearly, as the original owner was too poor to even afford a bowl of soup. But now things were different. He knew hunters could earn money. If that's the case, from now on he would hunt with magic for a living, even though he currently couldn't use magic. Just as the protagonist was wondering where to find monsters, he overheard people discussing a spatial gate that had opened, so he followed their gaze. Indeed, he saw a spatial vortex emitting special magical power fluctuations in midair, so there were monsters inside. It seemed he needed to analyze it, but there were too many people here, making it inconvenient, and without a hunter's license, he couldn't enter. He wondered if there were others nearby. Suddenly, the protagonist paused, sensing a familiar energy. If he wasn't mistaken, there should be another spatial gate nearby. So the protagonist followed the energy up a mountain, progressing very smoothly, except that his body was so weak he nearly passed out from exhaustion. Looking at the yellow tape in front of him, the protagonist didn't know what it was, only feeling that Earth people's aesthetic taste needed improvement. Then he strode confidently toward the spatial gate. Shortly after the protagonist disappeared, another team arrived. This spatial gate had been frequently mutating recently, and they came to investigate the cause. As the group went deeper, not a single monster was spotted around. This phenomenon not only failed to alert some team members, but they even disregarded the warnings of the team's A-class hunter and Runsheng. Soon they paid the price for their ignorance. Meanwhile, the protagonist had advanced deep into the spatial gate, yet similarly encountered no monsters. This puzzled him. Could my understanding of spatial gates be wrong? Just then, he suddenly sensed a magical power fluctuation. This small but vibrant magical power came from humans. That meant someone had entered. The protagonist followed the magical power fluctuation to behind a huge rock, then witnessed the scene before him. What was a 4-person team moments ago was now reduced to 3. This sight terrified the other 2 members. Seeing this, Runsheng loudly warned the 2, "If you don't want to die, stay alert." But before his words finished, he felt a chill from behind. In this critical moment, Runsheng timely used his shield to create a barrier, blocking this fatal strike. Then he slammed the ground forcefully, using the momentum to leap high, followed by a swift, powerful kick to the stone creature's body. When everything calmed down, the stone creature had become shattered rocks. The other two looked at this scene in shock, as expected of an A-class hunter, even though he's defense type. And Runsheng ignored their flattery, telling them to quickly collect the remains and leave. However, soon he felt another chill from behind. This time he couldn't react in time, was directly grabbed, and then thrown like an insect. The other man in the team watched in horror. And the next moment, the stone creature's attack reached him. The man immediately swung his sword at the opponent, but upon contact, his sword broke into two. Following was him being sent flying by a punch. This scene completely terrified the last woman. Facing the stone creature's incoming fist, she even forgot to run. Fortunately, at the critical moment, the recovered and Runsheng blocked this strike for her. Now was the perfect opportunity to use binding magic. If they couldn't trap it here, they would all perish. However, at this most desperate moment, this woman actually abandoned her teammates and ran alone. Can you believe it? At that moment, the man's eyes were filled with regret. Then, inevitably, the man was pummeled to the ground by the monster. In the last moment before losing consciousness, and Runsheng felt only emptiness. Once upon a time, he had fortunately awakened with A-class talent, but refused invitations from many large guilds. Then found some decent people, and formed a team. He thought everything would go smoothly. Who would have thought his final end would be so tragic? Seeing the opponent about to offline, the protagonist who couldn't bear to watch finally stepped forward. Thanks to the other's earlier efforts, he had finally completed his analysis. Although this creature before him looked terrifyingly large, it was actually an old model magical golem. So-called golems were puppets driven by magical power. On the protagonist planet Alpha Uri, golems performed various tasks. From small chores like sweeping, running errands, and moving bricks to war puppets, they had everything. Their planet could be said to be a country built with golems as labor force, and the protagonist's specialty happened to be weapon golems. However, despite sounding confident, dealing with it wasn't easy at all. Though this fellow had a bulky body and slow attacks, the protagonist's body was too weak, feeling exhausted after dodging just a few times. But eventually, the protagonist seized an opportunity, because the large gem on the golem's arm was actually a magical power identification sensor. As long as a stop command could be input into the sensor, it would halt. Although typically only the golem's master and creator knew the emergency stop command. This model was so old that the protagonist knew without looking. So, with the protagonist writing down the stop command, the massive golem lost power and collapsed on the spot. Of course, this alone wasn't enough. To shut it down completely, the core from its back had to be removed. So the protagonist began working on it. Naturally, such a minor task presented no pressure. Looking at the object in his hand, the protagonist couldn't help but remark, "That was simple!" When Runsheng opened his eyes again, he witnessed the protagonist's moment of showing off. What happened? Did he defeat the monster alone? At this point, in Runsheng's eyes, the protagonist had already assumed the image of a master. Seeing that the other had awakened, the protagonist jumped down from the monster, then walked towards him. Seeing this, Runsheng was terrified, cold sweat covering his forehead, because in such situations, it was easy to be silenced. But no matter how he struggled, his body wouldn't move. The protagonist quickly came to his side, looking down at him, and Runsheng thought he was done for, but unexpectedly the other extended a hand to him, then said, "Need help?" Thus successfully surviving a dangerous dungeon mission, and Runsheng received widespread media attention. But he wasn't happy at all, because he knew it was all thanks to that person. However, the Hunters Association wanted to credit this achievement to him. Although they also knew someone else had killed the monster, and Runsheng didn't even know that person's name. If that person was really a stronger hunter than Runsheng, there was no reason why Runsheng wouldn't recognize him, unless that person had never registered. So no matter how Runsheng objected, the association people urged him to accept, otherwise it would affect his image. But regardless of their persuasion, Runsheng wanted to honestly tell the truth, because this was the most basic respect for that hunter. Finally, the association people understood his determination, and stopped persuading him before letting him leave, although the man with glasses wanted Runsheng to take credit. He similarly hoped to meet this hunter who was both powerful and principled. Meanwhile, the protagonist they were all thinking about was opening the door to a new world. Playing with a phone for the first time, he was deeply fascinated. Earth people are truly divine. Since accidentally unlocking the phone last night, he hadn't stopped. Everything on it captivated him. This was the paradise he had hoped for. Thanks to the phone, the protagonist easily obtained the information he wanted, learning that entering spatial gates required adherence to strict level systems. And all awakened who wished to enter spatial gates must register as hunters with the Hunters Association. At the same time, he also discovered that the previous person was actually A-class, but other matters needed to be set aside for now, because for him, the most important thing currently was to get a hunter's license. So the protagonist applied to become a hunter. The first thing after registration was to receive safety theory education about spatial gates along with others. The protagonist listened boredly, summarizing it as, "Don't be too cocky in front of monsters." After the safety education, staff members distributed equipment to everyone. The protagonist looked confusedly at the object in his hand, not understanding what it was. Unexpectedly, in this era, there were still people who didn't recognize this thing. Others ridiculed him, asking if he was from outer space. The protagonist nearby heard this and broke out in a cold sweat. What's going on? Has my alien identity been exposed? The staff told the protagonist this was a standard analyzer, then explained how to use it. Once everyone had their equipment, the education lady asked everyone to point their lenses at the butterfly in the air. The protagonist followed instructions and took a photo, which immediately displayed the monster's level and name. So that's how Earth people identify enemies. Additionally, the staff told the protagonist this analyzer could not only analyze monsters but also detect equipment. Hearing this, the protagonist immediately took a photo of the staff member. The results showed nothing. It seems this person is not good enough. Then the protagonist started using it on nearby plants, and indeed, information was displayed. But when he used it on the ground, nothing was shown. The protagonist didn't understand why. Could it be that this device only recognizes things with magical power? Determine whether an item is useful or not based on whether it has magic power. Although it is convenient, it is not very accurate. After all, some things are very useful even without magical power. These ordinary soils being a typical example. Because soil can be used to make mana absorption agent, a rare item. However, looking at the situation, no one here seemed to know this. Any world with even slightly developed magical technology would know about mana absorption agents. Suddenly, the protagonist had a flash of insight. The next moment, he stopped the staff and said, "I want to ask you something." The staff told him to just ask. Without any hesitation, the protagonist asked his burning question, when did magic awakening first appear? Without any hesitation, the staff member gave the correct answer, of course, 7 years ago. 7 years ago, various awakened appeared simultaneously worldwide. The protagonist listened to this answer in disbelief. What? Only 7 years? The magical history of Alpha Yuri exceeds 60,000 years. So I've been living with primitive people all along. Thinking of this, the protagonist involuntarily shed tears. No wonder only electronic technology had developed leaps and bounds. But speaking of which, even if he used a mana absorption agent, would anyone know? Hunters had always been portrayed in media as a high-paying profession living in luxury. But unlike what ordinary people imagined, the life of a low-level hunter was literally hell. Plus, this body the protagonist possessed had an issue with one leg, and now he couldn't use magic. So before starving to death, he needed to find a job. To deal with monsters, the protagonist acquired many mana absorption agents. And there were indeed monsters on Earth that could be killed with this, but those monsters lived in C-class spatial gates. And as a mere F-class, the protagonist had no qualification to enter. New to Earth, he was still unfamiliar with everything, and couldn't establish a mana absorption agent business. This was quite troubling. Just then, his phone suddenly vibrated violently, startling the protagonist. The protagonist checked his phone and found it was a disaster alert. A B-class monster had appeared, urging everyone to seek shelter quickly. Hide? That's impossible. At times like this, of course, the choice is to go out and watch the excitement. The protagonist dressed and went to the street, only to see people around fleeing in panic. Not far ahead, on a TV tower, a huge B-class monster was roaring loudly. Of course, there were also some fearless onlookers, and the area was already cordoned off. Suddenly, the protagonist was bumped. But the person who bumped him, far from apologizing, complained that the protagonist was in the way. The protagonist looked at him with a gloomy face, and the other thought he wanted to fight. However, the protagonist didn't understand what this meant. "I'm just looking at you." Seeing the protagonist's seemingly aggressive demeanor, the blonde improved his attitude, stating he was a hunter, and warning the protagonist to keep his distance. The protagonist, unwilling to back down, declared that he too was a hunter. The blonde asked what level. Then he heard the protagonist say F-class, to which the blonde nearly died laughing, "Ha ha ha, what useless trash." The protagonist looked at him puzzledly. What is this guy laughing at? To prevent the monster from harming ordinary citizens, the military deployed helicopters to intercept. However, their attacks were merely tickles to the monster. And with just a casual tail swipe, the helicopter turned into a massive fireball as it crashed. Fortunately, at this moment, support hunters finally arrived. Seeing 2 civilians about to fall into the monster's mouth, one hunter jumped directly from the helicopter, slicing off its massive tongue with a sword. Instantly, the monster emitted a painful howl. Then it turned and fled without hesitation. At this moment, another hunter aimed his bow and arrow at the target. The next moment, 2 arrows precisely hit the monster's tail. Seeing the situation deteriorate, the giant lizard monster decisively detached its tail to survive. But thinking of escape now was clearly too late. The protagonist's old acquaintance and Runsheng jumped directly from the plane, then with tremendous force kicked the monster's back. The monster immediately fell from midair to the ground, and Runsheng gave it no chance to breathe, delivering another powerful blow to the monster's stomach. Just like that, in merely 2 strikes, the monster that had been rampaging moments ago now lay motionless on the ground. Seeing the performance of these professional hunters, the watching crowd was excited with stars in their eyes. As the group finishes dealing with the monsters, they walk toward the male protagonist. Recently, the protagonist has learned that A-rank hunters are the backbone of this world, which is why everyone admires them so much, to the point of practically fawning over them. Yet this very same person, upon seeing the protagonist, immediately takes both his hands, and like an enthusiastic fan, respectfully greets him with admiration. Just thinking about how the protagonist defeated the magical golem in the space gate, and Runsheng finds him incredibly impressive. The blonde youth who previously looked down on the protagonist now glances at him nervously, thinking, wait, could he actually be a powerful figure? Noticing this youth stealing glances, and Runsheng looks at him with a dark expression, asking the protagonist if this person is his friend. The blonde youth is nearly frightened to death, stammering without being able to form a complete sentence. However, Runsheng quickly dismisses him, and happily introduces himself to the protagonist, offering his business card and, of course, asking for the protagonist's name. Next, Runsheng invites the protagonist into a small grove of trees. Please don't misunderstand, he merely wishes to repay the protagonist for saving his life. As it happens, the protagonist needs someone's assistance, so he takes out his phone, points to a location on the map and asks, can you enter a space gate with me? Soon the two enter a space gate that appears completely desolate. Even now, Runsheng can hardly believe that such a powerful hunter as the protagonist is merely ranked F. Earlier, the protagonist had revealed his true rank to him. But how could this be possible? Runsheng suspects the measuring device must be broken. However, he quickly concocts his own explanation, since mid-rank and above awakened are semi-forced to participate in dungeon instances. Therefore, some people who don't want to be manipulated by the association will fabricate false awakening values. And in his eyes, the protagonist is undoubtedly such a person. The two advance through the dungeon, and soon the protagonist finds his target, creatures resembling bats. And Runsheng is curious about what the protagonist will do, but he simply watches as the protagonist takes out a handful of soil and scatters it toward the sky. The next moment, the bats transform into fireballs and fall from the air. The effect of the mana absorption potion is impressively immediate. However, witnessing this scene, Runsheng is puzzled. Why use tools when one could easily handle this barehanded? The protagonist finds this exasperating. Did this guy earn his hunter license by using his toes? But Runsheng suspects the protagonist has been at the top for so long that he's forgotten the ecological environment of lower-ranked hunters. Seeing his expression, the protagonist realizes that no explanation will suffice, and there's no need to expose his weakness. With quick thinking, the protagonist begins making up an elaborate explanation. Since the awakening appeared, some people can lift one-ton trucks, others can manipulate elements out of thin air. These are all very convenient abilities. But since these powers appeared out of nowhere, they could just as easily disappear. I'm a bit afraid, so I prefer not to rely on awakening abilities. Initially concerned that Runsheng wouldn't believe him, he's surprised to see him move to tears. You're absolutely right. Why didn't I think of that? The more easily something is gained, the more easily it can be lost. After completing the dungeon, they enjoy some delicious food to reward themselves. And Runsheng asks the protagonist to continue including him in future ventures, explaining that his team recently disbanded, and he lacks experience on his own. Plus, he doesn't want to form another team. The protagonist understands his perspective. After experiencing betrayal from teammates, anyone would be psychologically traumatized. Moreover, the protagonist needs to team up with a high-rank hunter to enter high-level space gates, so he agrees to the request. Of course, the protagonist emphasizes to Runsheng, you must protect yourself well. I don't have the ability to save you. The protagonist is always telling the truth, but unfortunately, Runsheng doesn't believe him, thinking the powerful figure is simply concerned about his safety. The next day, while the protagonist is eating, he receives a call from Runsheng, informing him that a new dungeon has opened and asking if he wants to check it out. The protagonist excitedly agrees. Whenever a new space gate appears, the Hunters Association sends people to investigate and temporarily restricts entry until the investigation is complete. In this particular space gate, a special plant has reportedly been discovered. Considering that this unknown plant might be the key to restoring his magic, the protagonist decides to take a look, planning to leave immediately if it's not what he's seeking. At that moment, a luxury sports car suddenly races up, followed by a blue-haired man stepping out. Seeing this person wearing dark sunglasses and a large gold chain, with an arrogant demeanor, the protagonist asks Runsheng who he is. And Runsheng's answer surprises the protagonist. The man is Zhang Changhao, one of only 3 S-rank hunters in the country. The protagonist can see that his magical power is very stable. He is indeed a rare genius. While the protagonist is observing him, Zhang Changhao suddenly senses something, and the next moment, their gazes meet. The man's reaction surprises the protagonist. His eyes seem somewhat special. And Runsheng quietly informs the protagonist that those are dragon eyes, a rare artifact. As the two whisper to each other, Zhang Changhao walks toward them, ignoring Runsheng, the A-rank hunter, and looking directly at the protagonist, asking his name. After receiving an answer, he asks about the protagonist's hunter rank, and Runsheng nervously cuts in, claiming the protagonist is merely his porter. However, Zhang Changhao looks at Runsheng with disdain. I wasn't talking to you. Unable to challenge a powerful figure, and Runsheng fearfully hides behind the protagonist. The protagonist calmly replies, F rank. Hearing this, Zhang Changhao smirks mockingly. Is that so? Really? The man's behavior makes the protagonist suspicious. Could he see through this body's hidden magical power? Although his injury to the respiratory system prevents normal magical output, and the total amount of magic power remains unchanged, and Zhang Changhao can discern a person's potential through his dragon eyes. Nevertheless, the protagonist would never admit this, given that he possesses an officially certified hunter license. However, Zhang Changhao doesn't believe an F rank can look him directly in the eyes. He's about to invite the protagonist to collaborate when Runsheng suddenly interrupts, and Runsheng mentions that they have matters to attend to, and ignoring the protagonist's struggles, pushes him away. Once they're completely out of Zhang Changhao sight, and Runsheng explains why he acted this way. The man has a criminal record. No one is willing to enter a space gate with an S-rank ex-convict. And Runsheng has an A-rank relative ranked 3rd, who was recently attacked while in a dungeon with Zhang Changhao. Fearing he might attack the protagonist, and Runsheng helped him escape. Understanding all this, the protagonist is deeply moved. What an adorable mammal. Since the man seems so dangerous, they should forget about today's plan and check out that plan another time. However, there's one more thing. Since the man's dragon eyes are an artifact, might there be dragon lungs? If the protagonist could get a replacement, wouldn't that solve his inability to use magic? And Runsheng helps look into it and discovers that such an item indeed exists, with a somewhat reasonable price. 2.6 billion. What? 2.6 billion? One sentence immediately extinguishes the protagonist's enthusiasm. He'd rather not have known. The broke protagonist sheds tears of frustration. Soon they part ways, and the protagonist takes a taxi home. In the car, he researches information about Zhang Changhao, finding him increasingly terrifying. If only he hadn't looked at him earlier. What if he intends to harm him? As the saying goes, speak of the devil. A supercar suddenly appears behind the taxi, then accelerates and crashes into the taxi. With a violent screech of brakes, the taxi spins several times. Finally, it hit a pole on the side of the road and stopped. The protagonist tumbles under the seat. The recovered driver nervously looks back at the protagonist, sees that he's uninjured, then exits the car ready to curse. Do you even know how to drive, you? But then, Zhang Changhao steps out of his car. I'm truly sorry, haven't driven in a while and mixed up the brake and accelerator. He then takes out his phone, asking for the protagonist's contact information, claiming it's to resolve the accident. As for the driver, he tosses him a handful of money and tells him to leave. The protagonist watches this divine-level maneuver speechless. With the money in hand, the driver flees in an instant, leaving Zhang Changhao to once again demand the protagonist's phone number, saying he has no cash left and will transfer medical expenses to him later. Is this really how car accidents are handled? The protagonist feels like he's witnessing something entirely new, but he provides his phone number nonetheless. And just like that, an S-rank hunter goes to great lengths to finally add an F-rank hunter's contact information. Zhang Changhao was originally a rich second-generation heir, but he has a record of special violent behavior. Although he found a powerful lawyer to resolve the matter, the internet is filled with negative information about him. His biggest scandal occurred several years ago when his parents died due to a space gate outbreak. After the incident, Zhang Changhao immediately sold his parents' company, causing many to suspect he did something unfilial for money. Of course, those are just rumors without any evidence. Now, Zhang Changhao looks at the protagonist with interest. I have a lucrative job offer. Would you like to hear about it? After hearing Zhang Changhao's job proposal, the protagonist wonders, could it be that the man sees potential in this body? Does that mean when he regains the ability to use magic, he could easily bring this planet under his control? With this thought, the protagonist responds haughtily, I can't enter S-rank space gates now, so I don't know if I can work with you. However, Zhang Changhao's next words pull him back to cold reality. What are you thinking? A hunter of your rank couldn't possibly enter high-level space gates? It turns out Zhang Changhao wants to become the man behind the protagonist, personally cultivating him. Understanding his misinterpretation, the embarrassed protagonist wishes he could disappear on the spot. Oh, so that's it. But he still has one question. What exactly do you see in me that prompted this suggestion? Hearing this, Zhang Changhao slowly curves his lips into a smile. Well, you'll find out eventually. Feeling that something isn't quite right, the protagonist makes up an excuse and escapes, then tells Runsheng about the incident. Thinking about it now, that guy clearly crashed into him on purpose. Having heard the protagonist's experience, and Runsheng becomes more convinced that the man enjoys causing trouble for high-rank hunters. The protagonist agrees. What should we do? Should we call the police? But on what grounds? That an S-rank hunter wants to protect me and provide me with equipment? We'd probably be considered mentally ill. With no other option, the protagonist can only give up. At this moment, Runsheng suddenly mentions recent news claiming that humans are about to conquer the disaster of space gates. This topic interests the protagonist, who is curious about the existence of space gates. 7 years ago, this world underwent a transformation, with space gates and monsters appearing in people's lives, along with human awakened. Others might not know why, but the protagonist understands. The principle of magic involves utilizing mana released from the planet's core, but Earth's crust is too thick for mana to rise. However, the suddenly appearing space gates allowed mana to reach the surface, leading to the emergence of awakened humans. Yet there's one thing the protagonist can't figure out. What is the purpose of the entity that created the space gates? The monsters inside clearly want to kill humans, and the equipment that drops is merely bait placed on traps. But if the little mice avoid the traps and only eat the bait, Whoever is behind this would become very angry. And Runsheng finds the protagonist's words quite reasonable. Suddenly, the protagonist is alarmed, because he felt a force boiling like lava coming from under his feet, and the place where this power erupted was exactly under Runsheng's feet. And Runsheng feels nothing and wonders why the protagonist suddenly stopped. But the protagonist has no time to explain. He immediately pushes Runsheng away. Then, to Runsheng's disbelief, an immense energy suddenly surges skyward, enveloping the protagonist. Feeling the teleportation force on his body, the regretful protagonist realizes, I should have pulled him along. Just like that, when the protagonist regains consciousness, he finds himself in a white corridor. He looks around anxiously. So this is inside a space gate? It would be terrible to encounter monsters in such a narrow place. The protagonist can only start moving. Though with this body that can't even release magical power, he has no idea how to complete the dungeon. As he walks along, he soon reaches an open area, where further progress is blocked by a huge stone door, with what appears to be inscriptions on a stone tablet in front. The protagonist is about to examine it carefully when he suddenly senses people approaching from both sides, one of whom is Jiang Changhao, who has dubious intentions toward him, while he doesn't recognize the other person. Soon they all arrive at the stone tablet, forming a three-way standoff. Jiang Changhao immediately addresses the other person mockingly. Well, Zheng Jiaxing, I heard you were in Singapore? The other person replies, I returned today. Clearly these two don't get along well. So the protagonist asks Jiang Changhao, do you two know each other? One question shocks both men. Jiang Changhao immediately taunts face to face. So there are still people who don't recognize you. Seems like you need to work harder on your publicity. To this, the protagonist simply thinks, I didn't know you either before. Then, Jiang Changhao explains that the man is Zheng Jiaxing, the H country's #1 ranked hunter. The protagonist had no idea the other person was such an impressive figure. Next, Jiang Changhao introduces the protagonist, a completely ordinary F-rank hunter. The two exchange brief greetings. Then Zheng Jiaxing presses a button on his wristband, which turns out to be an analyzer. The protagonist is impressed by its sleek design. Results soon emerge. This is an unconfirmed space gate without relevant intelligence, classified as X rank. Seeing its X rank, Zheng Jiaxing feels troubled. The protagonist doesn't understand what X represents, and takes out his phone to look it up, but the screen shows only darkness. Having never encountered this before, the protagonist is confused. This is interference from the space gate. If they don't leave quickly, the phone will be ruined. So they begin studying the stone tablet, which reads, the symbol of true faith shall become the key. Although they don't understand the meaning of this sentence, it seems their only option is to push open this massive stone door and continue forward. Yet despite their best efforts, they cannot budge this small stone door. The protagonist is utterly astonished by this. Among the awakened, S-rank individuals are special existences, all possessing terrifying abilities. Yet now they are helpless against a stone door. Since brute force isn't working, the only thing left to try seems to be this strange lion statue. Jiang Changhao steps forward, takes one look, and concludes, judging by the size of this hole, it seems just right to insert an arm. One sentence leaves the other two silent. The protagonist already guesses what this means. But before he can decide whether to be the first to step up, Zheng Jiaxing takes the initiative, unhesitatingly inserting his arm into the lion's mouth. Simultaneously, a rumbling sound is heard. The protagonist and Jiang Changhao look toward the source, only to see that the previously immovable door has opened by itself. The protagonist notices Zheng Jiaxing's complexion doesn't look good, and asks what's wrong. Then he sees him raise the arm he just used. Apparently, he had blood drawn from him. He was so frightened that he wanted to pull his arm free but couldn't, and he even thought about cutting it off. Jiang Changhao doesn't care about any of this since it wasn't his blood. Now that the door's open, let's go. The protagonist feels something is amiss. Is it really that simple? So the three continue along the passage, only to encounter an identical door and an identical lion statue. Seeing this, Jiang Changhao's expression immediately darkens. Damn it, not again. However, Zheng Jiaxing simply pushes past him. There's no time to hesitate now, we must leave here quickly. The next moment he once again inserts his hand. The result is the same as before. The door opens automatically, and they encounter yet another stone door. This time, Zheng Jiaxing hopes Jiang Changhao will take a turn. As the lion's blood-drawing volume has changed, the first time I barely felt anything, but the second time I felt dizzy. If I'm not mistaken, the blood volume increases progressively, so Zheng Jiaxing hopes they can take turns. But clearly, Jiang Changhao lacks this spirit of sacrifice. Seeing that the other refuses to cooperate, Zheng Jiaxing's expression changes instantly. Meanwhile, Jiang Changhao maintains an arrogant "what can you do about it" attitude. As the atmosphere between them grows increasingly tense, the protagonist is about to intervene. Rather than waiting to be drained of a fatal amount of blood later, it's better to step forward now. But before he can speak, Jiang Changhao takes the initiative. Isn't there another person? Ask him. Hearing this, the protagonist immediately senses trouble. Although there aren't many monsters here, it's not exactly a safe place either. Considering a maze that requires blood offerings to proceed, it seems like a sacrifice is needed to leave. Realizing this, the protagonist inwardly laments, I'm doomed. However, Zheng Jiaxing's moral standards are clearly much higher than Jiang Changhao's. With 2 S ranks in the team, you still want to push the task to an F rank? Before he finishes speaking, everyone senses something and looks back, only to see a monster appear out of nowhere. Seeing this, the protagonist startles, so there are things here after all. The next second, the monster launches an attack, surprisingly targeting the protagonist first. With his current physical condition, the protagonist clearly can't withstand this attack, closing his eyes in fear. At the critical moment, Zhang Shaxing bends down, draws his sword, delivers a sudden thrust, and the monster is instantly eliminated. This impressive display leaves the protagonist stunned. As for the other guy, he's not worth mentioning. Just then, another monster appears behind Zhang Changhao. Seeing that he shows no reaction, the protagonist quickly warns him loudly. However, Zhang Changhao's emerald-like eyes merely glance back, and in the next moment, he brutally punches the monster to the ground. Witnessing this terrifying strength, the protagonist guesses his awakening ability relates to physical enhancement. With one punch, Zhang Changhao roughly estimates the monster's level, approximately C rank. At this point, Zhang Shaxing reminds everyone to stay alert. Hearing this, the two followed his gaze and saw the shadows of several monsters appearing on the walls on both sides, and soon numerous monsters emerge. In the blink of an eye, the three are completely surrounded by monsters. Although none are high level, the sheer number is troublesome. The two hunters who can't stand each other entrust their backs to one another. Then Zhang Changhao clenches his green glowing fist, unleashing a green energy wave that destroys everything in its path. Meanwhile, Zhang Shaxing grips his weapon tightly, and with one sword stroke, unleashes a firestorm that sweeps across a wide area. The protagonist watches the two S-rank hunters in amazement, as all monsters are drawn to them, leaving none for him. Soon, Zhang Shaxing begins to feel tired due to the blood loss weakening him. Plus, with so many monsters, continuing like this seems unsustainable. Just then, he notices the lion statue's glowing red eyes, and a sudden realization strikes him, so that's how it is. So Zhang Shaxing directs the others to look at the stone statue, where the lion's eyes now glow with a crimson light. Then Zhang Shaxing shares his theory. This space gate spawns monster hordes if blood isn't offered within a set time, but before he can finish, a monster suddenly appears behind him. Zhang Shaxing stabs the creature attempting to ambush him. Meanwhile, Zhang Changhao asks with interest, is there a time limit? Before he finishes speaking, a massive wave of monsters surges forth. Even Zhang Shaxing feels overwhelmed by this sight. No longer counting on Zhang Changhao, he shouts the protagonist's name, hoping he'll offer blood first. Unexpectedly, before the protagonist can respond, Zhang Changhao suddenly turns around, and without any hesitation, charges toward the statue. Despite countless monsters blocking his path, he doesn't pause for a moment, finally succeeding in inserting his arm. The next instant, countless monsters dissipate like ink. Both the protagonist and Zhang Shaxing are shocked by this sight, as the door to the next level slowly opens again. Now Jiang Changhao turns back and asks, who's next? Zhang Shaxing suggests they take turns, as the F-rank probably couldn't handle it. Truly a national hero with admirable character. Thanks to him, the protagonist hasn't even dirtied his clothes yet, making him feel somewhat embarrassed. And so, the three pass through several more stone doors. By now, due to excessive blood loss, even Zhang Shaxing, the strongest hunter, can barely stand. Seeing this, the protagonist hurries forward to support him, asking if he's alright. With a pale face, Zhang Shaxing says, I'm fine. These sudden-type space gates are generally small in scale. We should be near the exit. The protagonist looks at the still energetic Zhang Changhao, relieved that it's his turn to open the door. However, at this moment, Zhang Changhao suggests they stop, as no one can guarantee how many more doors lie ahead, and both men's bodies are nearly at their limits. Zhang Changhao believes they might have missed some clues and should go back to look. Zhang Shaxing feels he's just stalling, perhaps even planning to attack him during a monster wave, just as he did to Choi Jin before. Faced with this suspicion, Zhang Changhao falls silent for a moment, then without further words, turns and walks toward the statue. However, regarding Choi Jin, he maintains it was just a misunderstanding. I also understand why I'm not trusted. Given my prior record, now Zhang Changhao looks back, Zhang Shaxing, you're too wary of me. Even if it were your turn to offer blood, I would still suggest checking the rooms again. As he speaks, he has already inserted his hand. This time, he's clearly struggling too. Seeing this, Zhang Shaxing approaches with concern, asking if he can continue. Zhang Changhao claims he's fine. He brought recovery potions and can manage 2 more times. He begins rummaging through his bag. Zhang Shaxing suggests that if they don't see an exit at the next room, they'll try something else. The protagonist watches Jiang Changhao take out a recovery potion, thinking this person seems quite normal after all, and contemplates whether to help support him. But then he watches as Zhang Changhao swings the bottle at the completely unprepared Zhang Shaxing. With a thud, the bottle makes intimate contact with Zhang Shaxing's skull. And just like that, the mighty No-1 second-rank hunter is knocked out cold. Zhang Shaxing lost consciousness on the spot, and the male protagonist next to him was stunned. Zhang Changhao seems very satisfied with the result. Didn't expect this trick to work so well. With cold sweat forming, the protagonist asks Zhang Changhao why he did this. Zhang Changhao explains, this space gate resembles the Iron Maiden space gate that appeared in Northern Europe. If I'm not mistaken, hunters entering this space gate can only leave by sacrificing one person. And from recent survival rate statistics for X dungeons, it's unrelated to hunter rank. The survival rate is only around 60%. So just to be safe, Zheng Shaxing will have to take one for the team. The protagonist thinks carefully. He does have a point. If someone must be sacrificed, better not be himself. Besides, with 2 S ranks here, surely the responsibility wouldn't fall on an F rank? Despite this reasoning, the protagonist ultimately feels guilty. So when Zhang Changhao prepares to insert Zheng Shaxing's arm, the protagonist suddenly interrupts. Patting his chest, he volunteers for this room. Zhang Changhao glances at him. What, feeling guilty? Just stay quiet while I handle this. I'll ensure you leave here alive. Judging by the lion's blood volume, this trial should be ending soon. As the stone door slowly opens again, the protagonist exclaims in surprise, for the scene before them has finally changed. A humanoid statue stands not far away, with the dungeon's final reward resting quietly in its hands. Both men stare in disbelief. The exit? It ended so easily? Zhang Changhao feels this doesn't make sense. The price was too small. He had knocked out Zheng Shaxing thinking a living sacrifice was needed, but now this complicates things. If Zheng Shaxing wakes up and seeks accountability, it could cause major problems. However, the protagonist ignores the other's dilemma, calmly walking to the statue to claim the final reward. One glance confirms that the object is a precious magical artifact. Yet the protagonist shows no greed, suggesting they offer it to Zheng Shaxing as compensation. But Zhang Changhao thinks it's pointless. You do realize he attacked the #1 ranked hunter? Not just him, but even the association won't let him off. The best solution now is to eliminate him while there's a chance, since the body will disappear with a space gate anyway. But there's one problem. A witness. Zhang Changhao doesn't believe the protagonist will keep his secret. When the protagonist asks what he plans to do, kill him? This question saddens Zhang Changhao. I couldn't bear to, but I do have a small request. Placing his hand on the protagonist's shoulder, he stares with ill intent. Could you say that you were the one who knocked out Zheng Shaxing, and his reason for doing so was simply to test the protagonist's true nature? Zhang Changhao's eyesight differs from normal people due to his dragon eyes, a rare artifact obtained from the A-rank monster Green Dragon. Through them, he can not only enhance magical power and see great distances, but also directly determine a person's awakening value. Since acquiring these eyes, he's never had to squint to see anything, until he recently met the protagonist. Seeing unusual magical power in him, he immediately approached to ask his name and rank. Upon learning the other was merely an F rank, Zhang Changhao's first thought was that this was a lie, because an F-rank hunter simply couldn't look him in the eyes. To ordinary people and low-level awakened, high-level awakened like him emit a deadly danger like fierce beasts. To verify this, Zhang Changhao later visited a convenience store he hadn't been to in a long time, confirming that the clerk trembled in fear. So this F-rank business was clearly nonsense. Therefore, to test the protagonist, Zhang Changhao first created a minor accident, then offered him the best benefits deal in history. Yet throughout, the protagonist maintained a poker face. This attitude even made Zhang Changhao wonder, is he looking down on me, an S-rank hunter? Nevertheless, for Zhang Changhao, accustomed to all kinds of gazes, the protagonist's coldness actually satisfied him. So his request for the protagonist to take the blame absolutely isn't because he dislikes him. He could actually resolve the Zheng Shaxing situation, but he wants to know what ability the protagonist is hiding, and to see how he'll react to intimidation. To his surprise, the protagonist simply agrees. This greatly exceeds Zhang Changhao's expectations, leaving him momentarily speechless. He sees no fear on the protagonist's face. So why did he agree? Could it be to avoid conflict? Come to think of it, the protagonist said he currently can't enter S-rank space gates, but didn't say he never could before. Zhang Changhao has reason to suspect the protagonist is a high-level awakened, deliberately suppressing his magical power. But is it necessary to suppress it to this extent? Surely that must be uncomfortable. Although tempted to provoke him further, that's enough for today. For now, it's best to leave this cursed place. What he doesn't know is that beneath the protagonist's calm exterior, his heart is racing. Finally survived. So with the protagonist in front and Zhang Changhao supporting Zheng Shaxing behind, the three head toward the dungeon exit. When the protagonist returns outside, he's immediately shocked by the scene before him, as reporters are packed densely not far away. Seeing someone emerge alive, these waiting reporters become excited, with camera shutters continuously clicking. Simultaneously, reporters frantically begin asking questions. What's inside the space gate? What level are the monsters? Are there other survivors? It's only now that the protagonist realizes why there are so many people. All exits converge here. But before anyone can get answers from the protagonist, the reporters all widen their eyes in disbelief. They watch as Zheng Changhao carries the unconscious Zheng Shaxing out from the space gate. 2 S-ranks survived, but why is Zheng Shaxing unconscious? Meanwhile, association staff members immediately approach to inquire about the situation. Though they have many questions, their first concern is why Zheng Shaxing is unconscious. The staff initially think Zheng Shaxing was attacked by a secret mechanism inside the space gate. To everyone's surprise, Zhang Changhao looks at the protagonist and says, "We just had a little dispute when choosing a sacrifice, so he knocked out Zheng Shaxing." The protagonist looks at him incredulously, already lying as soon as we exit the dungeon. As for this explanation, the staff don't believe it at all. Compared to an unheard-of hunter, Zhang Changhao seems far more likely to have been the attacker. Although this is indeed what happened, being suspected still makes Zhang Changhao extremely displeased. The next moment, he glares with his green pupils at the protagonist. "Don't just stand there, say something." The protagonist, covered in cold sweat, reluctantly remains silent for a moment. Then with an expressionless face declares, "I was the one who knocked out Zhang Shaxing." Hearing this, both association staff and reporters stare with shock. Although the protagonist explains he never intended to harm Zhang Shaxing, that he only wanted him to sleep for a smooth dungeon completion, and that he'll apologize when he wakes up. But no matter what, this remains unbelievable, as non-S-rank hunters simply couldn't achieve such a feat. Just then, Zhang Changhao suddenly exhibits an extremely weak demeanor. Gasping for breath as he looks at the association staff, "How can I possibly attack Zhang Shaxing in this condition?" Hearing this, the association staff falls into silence. Although Zhang Changhao lost a lot of blood in the space gate, the protagonist remembers his condition wasn't this severe. He's probably faking it. At this moment, the reporters present suddenly react. They swarm toward the protagonist, repeatedly questioning if he really knocked out the S-rank hunter. The protagonist responds with a cold demeanor, "Yes, I did it." And after some time, looking at the news report about the protagonist in his hands, Zhang Shaxing, who is awakened in the hospital, clenches his fists tightly. How dare someone treat him this way? Meanwhile, Runsheng invites the protagonist to dinner. Though the previous news was deleted, and Runsheng had already seen it. He wants to know if the protagonist really knocked out Zhang Shaxing. The protagonist's response surprises him greatly. Well, sort of. Just as he finishes speaking, the protagonist's phone rings. Answering it, the protagonist feels the previously delicious meal instantly lose its appeal, because the caller is none other than Zhang Shaxing, the victim who is knocked unconscious. The protagonist responds politely while gesturing for Runsheng to start eating without him. He then steps aside to take the call, leaving Runsheng sitting alone. Zhang Shaxing's purpose for calling is simple. He wants to know if it was really the protagonist who knocked him out in the space gate, though the incident happened suddenly and he can't remember the process. By instinct, he feels Zhang Changhao was responsible, but he isn't certain. Zhang Shaxing says he only remembers being hit on the back of the head, but his last glimpse caught the protagonist's cold gaze. Therefore, he now asks the protagonist to explain the matter. The protagonist listens with cold sweat forming. This isn't good. Should he simply confess that Zhang Changhao threatened him to take the blame? But how can he trust Zhang Shaxing? It's worth noting that Zhang Shaxing is called a national hero not because he's a champion of justice, but simply because he's cleared the most space gates by far. In essence, he's just a workaholic interested only in dungeons. Would such a person protect a mere F-rank hunter like himself? So the protagonist takes responsibility. "Zhang Shaxing, I'm sorry. I was the one who knocked you out." The protagonist then explains he just didn't want to see Zhang pushing himself too hard and had planned to offer himself as the sacrifice. As an apology, he'll give him the dungeon rewards. This simple statement makes Zhang's veins bulge. Are you fucking kidding me? This issue could have been resolved through conversation, but now he's trying to settle it with a mere item. Zhang can't accept this. No matter who it is, being knocked unconscious in a space gate that requires a sacrifice wouldn't possibly believe it was for their own good. Moreover, Zhang Changhao and the protagonist knew each other from the beginning. Zhang suspects they're in cahoots. But most importantly, are you really an F-rank hunter? Hearing this, the protagonist falls silent. He wants to say he has special circumstances, but Zhang doesn't want to hear his nonsense anymore. Continuing would just waste time. Finally, Zhang looks out the window and says, "I'll be watching you from now on." Without waiting for the protagonist to explain further, he hangs up. Then Zhang apologizes to his assistant, who has been waiting nearby for some time. The assistant awkwardly laughs and says it's fine. She then hands over all the information he requested. Although the association quickly took measures and those news reports were taken down, those who needed to see them already had, and many people criticizing Zhang Shaxing appeared online. The assistant suggests he ignore these comments, but Zhang isn't that fragile. The current problem is that the whole world now knows S-rank hunters aren't invincible, which will make many people anxious. And the person who caused all this, the assistant guesses that it's Zhang Changhao. She's also investigated the protagonist's identity. He truly is just an F-rank. Initially, Zhang thought so too, but if that were the case, Zhang Changhao would have no reason to let him live. There would be no need to threaten him to take the blame. Killing him would be simpler, wouldn't it? More importantly, those eyes he saw when he fell, completely devoid of human emotion. Since awakening, Zhang has never seen someone with such a jarring incongruity. He has reason to suspect the other's rank is fabricated. He asks his assistant to contact the association, to request a retest of that man's awakening value. The abilities used by awakened ones are collectively called skills. Every awakened one learns at least one skill a moment of awakening. But magic on this planet has various restrictions. For example, Zhang Shaxing with his fire attribute, no matter how hard he tries, cannot learn other types of magic. Their only way to use other elemental magic is to spend enormous sums to purchase skill stones. But the protagonist is different, having learned various magics before being reincarnated. Theoretically, as long as conditions are met, he can use all magic from Earth. However, this body's lung problems prevent mana fusion, leaving his talents unexpressed. To solve this issue, he discovered a method to produce mana amplifiers. But the space gate containing the necessary materials isn't easily accessible. Because it's controlled by Magic Tower, the guild with the most hunters currently. Now the protagonist stands outside Magic Tower, but is immediately turned away by staff, because he came yesterday without an appointment, and those without appointments cannot enter. However, at this moment the protagonist's subordinate Enrunsheng suddenly appears. He had asked Enrunsheng to help make an appointment, and as a famous A-rank hunter, Enrunsheng's request was much easier to process. Seeing Enrunsheng, the previously impatient staff member instantly changes his attitude. He happens to be Enrunsheng's fan. The two begin enthusiastically conversing. Enrunsheng explains he's made an appointment with Magic Tower's representative through the guild. The protagonist thus smoothly enters Magic Tower, with the staff even apologizing for earlier. Then they arrive at the front desk to confirm their appointment, and the front desk had already been notified and informed that their representative was on the very top floor. They are instructed to take the elevator up themselves. But when the elevator reaches the 60th floor, the scene before them startles both men. The protagonist looks at the scene with cold sweat. Something seems wrong here. They had pressed the button for the 60th floor, but they arrived at the second floor instead. The protagonist thought the elevator was broken, then heard Enrunsheng's explanation. This was actually a test from the guild leader. Magic Tower's representative is the guild leader herself, one of the 3 strongest S-rank hunters with an eccentric personality. Any visitor wanting to see her must pass through a maze challenge, and Magic Tower itself is a massive labyrinth, so they would have to find the top floor themselves. Hearing this, the protagonist decides to use the stairs. However, things are clearly not that simple. After the second floor, what appears is underground parking. It turns out that as soon as you open the door, you're linked to the inexplicable space, and the two of them are circling around and around. Seeing this, they return to the second floor, and the protagonist asks how many people have passed this test. Enrunsheng nervously replies that he's never heard of anyone succeeding. Not only that, but except for a few high-level staff, even employees don't know the path. Making visitors pass through such a complex maze empty-handed, truly eccentric. But have to say, this maze is really well done. The protagonist is looking forward to meeting the mage who created it, because this magically constructed maze gives him a sense of his homeland's ambiance. The two return to the elevator doors, and Enrunsheng asks what to do, and the protagonist tells him not to worry. He places his hand on the elevator door to carefully sense it. Even though his current body is useless, there are still things he can do, and this magical structure is surprisingly simple. He's found the path to the top floor. Hearing this, Enrunsheng widens his eyes in disbelief. Really? How do we get there? The protagonist answers with actions, first pressing the elevator button, then pressing the top floor button from outside, finally stepping back and waiting for the doors to close, gesturing for Enrunsheng to step back as well. Next, the protagonist takes several steps back, then, to Enrunsheng's shock, delivers a powerful kick to the elevator doors. Under the tremendous force, the doors are kicked in, revealing a vast empty space. Enrunsheng watches with cold sweat, not understanding why the protagonist suddenly did this. The protagonist calmly says, "Let's go." Below connects to the space gate above. As soon as he finishes speaking, he jumps down without hesitation. When his feet touch ground again, he's in another space entirely. Of course, Enrunsheng followed, though he found this even more thrilling than jumping off cliffs and space gates. Just then, a voice suddenly comes from not far away. "I didn't expect you to find this place." Then they see a stunning red-haired young woman turn around. "You two are the fastest to ever clear our maze." Enrunsheng is immediately captivated by her beauty, while the protagonist maintains his expressionless face. The woman stands up saying, "I didn't expect you to find the hidden passage, but your luck ends here. Because from now on, you'll be facing me, Magic Tower Guild representative, Esther." Next, Esther invites them to sit, then asks Enrunsheng to introduce the protagonist, expressing interest in him. Because ordinary analytical skills couldn't possibly find her maze's passage, yet the protagonist solved it so easily. Meanwhile, the protagonist realizes this is the maze's designer, indeed eccentric as rumored. He then introduces himself. Esther smiles at the protagonist. "I like capable people. As fellow rare attribute holders, let's get along well." However, as an alien who has just crossed over, the protagonist doesn't understand what she means. What same rare attribute? It turns out Esther mistakenly believes the protagonist has awakened analytical skills, which are extremely rare. Meanwhile, Enrunsheng explains to the protagonist that Esther is one of the world's few curse attribute hunters. Only then does the protagonist recall that she's an awakened one, who kills monsters using various status effects. This world has only recently developed magic, and few can use complex spells. Most are like Zheng Shaxing and Zhang Changhao, relying purely on brute force. Even defense and recovery types like Enrunsheng are rare, while special ability users with appraisal, curse, or mind control skills are exceedingly rare. Realizing this, the protagonist begins to bluff. "Sorry, I didn't recognize you. I'm not well informed." Hearing this, Esther covers her mouth with a smile. "Someone as skilled as you in appraisal must be swamped with requests? I've been appearing on TV shows recently." With the small talk concluded, they move to the main topic. Esther asks if Enrunsheng wants to enter their space gate. Suddenly addressed, Enrunsheng quickly replies that he's not the one entering, it's the protagonist. The protagonist explains that Enrunsheng only made the appointment because his rank was too low for Magic Tower staff to acknowledge him. Saying this, he produces his credentials. Esther is somewhat surprised, F rank, but she isn't too shocked. Appraisers are usually like this, though this is low even for appraisers. Additionally, Esther is curious why the protagonist wants to enter that space gate. If he intends to collect materials from the tree, that would trouble her, as even she doesn't have enough of those tree materials. Hearing this, the protagonist solemnly promises he won't touch the tree area. Yet even so, Esther can't simply agree to let him enter, assuming he's from the New Sisters Guild like in Runsheng. After all, monopolizing a space gate requires substantial funding. She's not running a charity. If he really wants access, he shouldn't have come himself, but arranged for guild-to-guild negotiations. So she reminds the protagonist not to try taking advantage. I hate haggling. Remember to remind your guild. The protagonist feels she's showing off. It's just a low-level dungeon. They probably don't even recognize a quarter of the good resources inside. But his next words surprise Esther. I'm sorry, I don't have a guild. And Runsheng stands to vouch for him. That's right. Forget guilds. Boss doesn't even have his own team. He always works alone. The protagonist adds, though you keep calling me an appraiser, I've never worked in that field. In this circle, I only know in Runsheng. This nearly moves in Runsheng to tears. The protagonist explains this is just a personal request. No guild will benefit from it. He's about to present his terms. He never expected free entry to someone else's space gate. But before he can finish, Esther suddenly interrupts. Wait, you mean? The previously cold and distant Esther now appears excited, her hair practically dancing with excitement. She eyes the protagonist like a hunter spotting the most delicious prey. Her expression makes the protagonist break into a cold sweat. What's going on? I haven't even offered my tempting terms yet, Esther exclaims. Join Magic Tower. I'll hire you immediately. That space gate is nothing. I'll give it to you for free if you come. Hearing this, the protagonist remains outwardly unmoved, but inwardly he's ecstatic. Wow, is this really happening? Meanwhile, and Runsheng quietly explains. Large guilds like Magic Tower have high circulation of magic crystals and equipment, so they desperately need appraisal talents. The male protagonist understood after hearing this. Humans on Earth can't judge magic crystal purity with the naked eye. To avoid being cheated, they need appraisers during transactions. While the protagonist is pondering, Esther suddenly extends her hand and announces, the signing bonus is 5 billion. Hearing this, the protagonist is shocked by her generosity and involuntarily exclaims, What did you say? Esther misunderstands, thinking the New Sisters Guild offered him an even higher price. She nearly howls in frustration. They already took in Runsheng. Why are they trying to poach another hunter she's interested in? And Runsheng nervously tries to calm her. Meanwhile, the protagonist is thinking about how many meals he could buy with 5 billion. Having calmed down, Esther smooths her hair and explains they've hired many excellent appraisers, so the workload isn't heavy. Though he heard clearly, the protagonist wants confirmation. You really want to spend 5 billion to hire me as an appraiser? Sensing an opportunity, Esther happily replies, Of course. At this moment, the protagonist is truly tempted. No need to struggle exploring space gates, just appraising equipment for a fortune. He's almost ready to agree. Then, Esther happily adds, the analysis department has flexible working hours. You only need to work 4 days a week. However, this single statement shatters the protagonist's fantasy. The words work deeply, triggering his sensitive nerves. I reincarnated to retire. Now you want me to sign a contract and go back to working in a company? No way. Having a job means overtime, reporting to supervisors, handling complaints from ordinary people. Just thinking about it gives the protagonist a headache. No, I absolutely refuse to work. By now, Esther has produced their highest paying contract. Even A-rank Hunter in Runsheng is shocked seeing it. Esther seizes the moment, and Runsheng, if you change your mind, we welcome you anytime. Not noticing the protagonist has already lowered his head in disappointment. Then his low voice comes through. I'm sorry, please forget about your previous offer. Hearing this, Esther is stunned. How much money do you want? The protagonist explains it's not about money. He simply doesn't want to join any guild. Esther looks directly into his eyes, confirming this is his true intention. Then her demeanor changes instantly. Is that so? Since you've decided, but will this be all right? Rejecting my offer means you'll spend a large sum to enter the space gate. The protagonist certainly can't produce such money, but he's prepared. I want to make a deal with you. Standing up, he says, I know of a miraculous substance. If mixed into cement and metal for building construction, it can, to a certain extent, immunize against any skill and absorb mana. Even monster attacks won't bring it down. Moving to the window, he continues, the entire magic tower is wrapped in a barrier. Maintenance costs must be high. The protagonist believes this is more than enough as an entrance fee. Esther listens with boredom, then responds coldly, this would certainly be enough. If the material actually works, the protagonist directly pulls out a bag of sand from his pocket. You can have as much as you want, only I know the location. And Runsheng immediately recognizes it as what the protagonist used against the firebats earlier. But does this sand really absorb mana? Though using this as a condition seems somewhat unprofitable, that place has frequent visitors and would eventually be discovered anyway. Might as well earn some goodwill. Esther picks up the sand, curious if it really has such effects. Then she asks the protagonist, suspicious, trading such valuable information to enter a garbage space gate. You haven't made this deal with others, have you? Hearing this, the protagonist is speechless. Earlier she claimed her space gate was valuable, now she calls it garbage. Women, huh? The protagonist asks if he needs to promise not to tell others, while Esther wonders if he's getting a bad deal. While they're discussing, Esther's assistant brings coffee for everyone. Regarding the earlier question, the protagonist says, consider it mutual benefit between us rare attribute holders. In an instant, the protagonist and Runsheng have left, and Esther drinks her coffee as usual. But her assistant feels the representative seems somewhat unhappy, so she asks about it. Esther says it's not really unhappiness. She just played a joke on the client. This startles the assistant. Did she place a curse on the recent guest? Thinking this, the assistant immediately goes into mother hen mode. Representative, you promised not to do such things. Esther seems unconcerned. It's not a scary curse. The assistant asks what she used, and Esther happily replies, 30 seconds of sneezing. Hearing this, the assistant finds it trivial, but notes no one sneezed? That's right. When she activated her skill, that man should have sneezed. But he suddenly looked up at her. In that moment, his eyes were filled with killing intent. Even Esther was frightened. He definitely noticed. Even S ranks can't escape her curses. Yet this monster appeared from nowhere. While Esther is grumbling, the test results for the protagonist's sand come back. It really has mana absorption properties. The assistants speculate the protagonist wanted to leave a good impression on the representative. But Esther finds this even more terrifying. She then asks for the protagonist's profile. She wants to see what this man is really planning. Scene change to elsewhere. The previously stoic protagonist is now bent over on a street corner, continuously vomiting. Not from the curse, but from the coffee he drank earlier. He had heard it was prepared for important guests, so he drank it without suspicion. Then nearly spat it out immediately, because it tasted exactly like industrial adhesive from Alpha Uri, some special drink for guests. Giving me this stuff. Then their eyes met, and at that moment, Esther used her curse. The protagonist, afraid of revealing his alien identity, wanted to vomit but dared not, while Esther mistook the look in his eyes for killing intent. Little did she know, the protagonist's body is controlled by Little Green through magic. Unless someone's magic is more powerful than this alien's, no method can wrestle control of this body away. Even an S-rank hunter's curse is no exception. Recovered, the protagonist shakily buys mineral water to rinse his mouth, while Runsheng asks about what he gave Esther. He's never heard of such a substance that can instantly extinguish firebat's flames while making buildings more durable. The value of such material is obvious, yet the protagonist didn't submit it to the association but gave it to Magic Tower. And Runsheng suspects the protagonist dislikes the association, but the protagonist says no, he has no feelings toward the association whatsoever. He explains he just wanted to leave a good impression on Esther. This simple statement greatly surprises Runsheng. He wonders if Esther might be the protagonist's type, but the protagonist states he has no feelings for Esther either. Oh, I see. Having guessed wrong twice, and Runsheng falls into an awkward situation. Then what are you looking for in that space gate that makes you go to such lengths? The next day, the aching protagonist stretches and wakes up, then immediately checks if the items nearby are dry. These were collected yesterday when he entered the space gate with Runsheng after dealing with Esther. These are materials needed for making the mana amplifier. Fairy-type monster wings. He originally thought they would be difficult to obtain, but thanks to Runsheng's help, since the hardest material has been acquired, the rest is much easier. The protagonist thinks he has taken another big step toward regaining his former power. But setting that aside, there's something more important now. Filling his stomach. However, while pondering what to eat today, he suddenly hears a knock at the door. Confused, he wonders, what's happening? Who's here? Could it be this body's family? If it's someone the original owner knew, that would be troublesome. With trepidation, the protagonist opens the door to find a beautiful woman and two large men. The woman is someone he knows, Xuan Yuyan from the Hunter Association. The protagonist wonders what they want, then learns from Xuan Yuyan. Someone reported him for falsifying his awakening level, and he now needs to go to the Hunter Association for investigation. Hearing this, the protagonist is shocked. What did you say? Meanwhile, the two large men are already cracking their knuckles. If you don't want to be arrested, you'd better cooperate. The protagonist looks at them with cold sweat. Seems he won't be eating that meal after all. Soon they are sitting in a car heading to the association. Xuan Yuyan sits alone in the front seat, scrolling through her phone, while the protagonist is sandwiched between the two large men, afraid to move. Actually, Xuan Yuyan has long suspected the protagonist's rank. After all, how could a mere F rank defeat Fikino SS? As for his talk about luck and such, Xuan Yuyan doesn't believe it at all. However, after checking records, she became more confused. He really is F rank? And he only has one record of entering a space gate. His hunter resume is incredibly simple. An F rank who has only entered one F rank space gate took down a C rank monster in one go? That doesn't sound right. If he really concealed his awakening level, it could be dangerous. Such people are usually up to no good. But Xuan Yuyan lacks the authority to further investigate the protagonist, so she reported it upward. Originally, the matter would have been dropped. Higher-ups didn't take the report seriously. But a few days ago, there was an unexpected development. Zheng Shaxing, who left the space gate unconscious, also reported the protagonist. Unlike Xuan Yuyan, who is just a minor civil servant, Zheng Shaxing is a national hero. After receiving the retest notice, Xuan Yuyan had expected the protagonist to resist, yet surprisingly, he came along obediently, and that broken-down old house he lived in certainly doesn't look like where a high-rank hunter would live. Could he be hiding his money somewhere? While Xuan Yuyan is pondering, the protagonist, now in different clothes, suddenly interrupts, asking how much the awakening value retest costs. He can barely afford meals. Xuan Yuyan explains, the test fee is 480,000. However, since this is a retest, if the data doesn't change, it's free. If the data proves falsified, you'll have to pay the test fee plus an additional fine. The protagonist, initially worried about his situation, relaxes after seeing how others are tested. With this kind of equipment, people with respiratory problems can't have their mana measured. The protagonist feels certain. Fortunately, the original body was a smoker with damaged lungs, so the equipment can't detect anything. However, his relief lasts only seconds before Xuan Yuyan mentions they have newer equipment. The association had long discovered the tests reduced accuracy with lung disease patients and issued notices, though the protagonist wouldn't know that. Soon they arrive at high-tech equipment, and Xuan Yuyan reminds the protagonist he has one last chance to correct his level voluntarily. The protagonist hurriedly explains there must be some misunderstanding, but at this point, no matter how he struggles, it's useless. Finally screaming, he's strapped to the cold metal bed. Soon the test results emerge. The protagonist nervously sits on the bed awaiting judgment. Before announcing, Xuan Yuyan kindly reminds him, "You know the punishment for falsifying ranks, right?" The protagonist listens with cold sweat. He doesn't know. Will this body's frightening mana be discovered? How will he explain? Confess he's an alien? More importantly, the 480,000 test fee. How could he possibly afford it? While the protagonist is worrying, Xuan Yuyan has seen the result. Awakening value 14, F rank. You're not suspect after all. Only 2 points higher than last year. That's normal. Xuan Yuyan tells him not to worry. The protagonist is finally relieved about not paying the fine, but he's not happy. So this body really is only F rank? He thought his inability to cast magic was due to lung problems. But actually this body simply has no mana. No wonder in the space gate the golem only attacked and run Sheng without noticing his presence. It never even considered him an intruder. Thinking of this, the protagonist laughs self-mockingly, making Xuan Yuyan wonder if he's mentally unwell. Little does she know the protagonist is fixated on one thought: his reincarnation magic failed, and from now on, he must live on Earth as the weakest mage. The protagonist leaves the association in a daze, but at least his suspicion has been cleared. Xuan Yuyan, responsible for escorting him out, worriedly asks, seeing his state, "Are you sure you don't need to go to the hospital? Low-rank awakened ones often experience side effects after testing. If you're feeling unwell, you should get checked." The protagonist says it's unnecessary and thanks her for her concern, though he's nearly moved to tears. This earthling is actually worried about me. Still, he's curious how she knew he'd be home today. It turns out Xuan Yuyan's skill is tracking. She can locate objects and people in real time. She's explaining how this ability is suitable for tracking criminals when the protagonist suddenly interrupts her. Then they both stare at the ground in shock. Not far away, a figure lies in a pool of blood. It was a civet cat killed by a car. Having recovered, Xuan Yuyan wasn't planning to do anything. She's seen this many times, but the protagonist's reaction shocks her. He directly picks up the civet cat's body. Seeing this, Xuan Yuyan warns him the civet cat has been dead for some time, and handling it directly is unhygienic. Yet the protagonist clutches it firmly. "If it gets dirty, I'll just wash it clean." Then the protagonist stands to bid Xuan Yuyan farewell. She looks at him incredulously, stuttering, "All right, be careful." She assumes the protagonist wants to give the civet cat a proper burial, never expecting he had such a kind side. Watching him leave, this moment leaves an indelible impression of this man. Little does she know, out of her sight, the protagonist is nearly dizzy with happiness. It's like manna from heaven. What an excellent biological specimen I've found. On the protagonist's planet, there are two types of golems, one assembled from rocks and metals as weapons, the other made from animal corpses, organic golems. In simple terms, the protagonist has obtained an experimental subject, so the protagonist returns home and begins experimenting, but somehow the compounding isn't going smoothly. After all, he lacks proper tools. Temperature, humidity, and concentration are all difficult to control. While the protagonist is troubled, his phone suddenly rings. He impatiently picks up to see who's calling at 10 p.m. He regrets his earlier carelessness. After returning from Magic Tower, he added an appraisal tag to his profile, not realizing this was public information. Since then, recruitment calls have been constant. He's tired of answering, so he hangs up. He's too exhausted to respond now. Suddenly, his phone vibrates again. He picks it up. What now? Then sees a chocolate advertisement pop up, saying meeting you at the convenience store. Having never seen such things, the protagonist thinks it's addressed specifically to him. So late at night, he walks alone toward the convenience store, despite feeling exhausted. But thinking this was specially prepared for him, not going would be too impolite. Before he gets far, he finds the road blocked by a van. The protagonist approaches to check, not understanding why someone parked here. How rude. He doesn't notice two people in the car watching him with malicious intent. Then, as the protagonist turns to find another path, a man suddenly rushes out from the car, followed by an ambush. The unexpected incident leaves the protagonist confused. Despite struggling hard, he can't break free. Thus, his consciousness gradually fades into unconscious. He doesn't know how long he's been unconscious. When he wakes up, he finds himself tied up. His eyes are covered with a black cloth, and he has no idea what's happening. At this moment, he feels that Earth is truly a terrifying place. He's been kidnapped shortly after arriving. Just then, a conversation suddenly reaches his ears. Is this the F-class guy? Yes, we found an opportunity to capture him. Through their conversation, the protagonist can analyze that this isn't an accident but a premeditated plot. While the two continue chatting, their boss arrives. The boss immediately orders them to bow, explaining that before them stands their very important person client. Then he instructs his subordinates to check the merchandise, as the client wants to see it soon. It's at this moment that the protagonist realizes he is the merchandise. Originally, the protagonist was meant for another client, but upon seeing him, the very important person client slowly breaks into a smile. Then he alerts the others that their bound captive seems to be awake. Though the protagonist hasn't moved at all, he doesn't understand how he's been exposed. Before he can figure it out, someone steps forward and tears off the blindfold. A familiar figure appears before him, S-Class Hunter Jiang Changhao, who speaks with interest, long time no see. Seeing that the protagonist still seems confused about the situation, Jiang Changhao kindly explains. Apparently, because he broke through the Magic Tower maze, he's become quite famous in certain circles. And ironically, despite his high-level appraisal skill, this awakened individual has only an F-Class Hunter rank. So the protagonist with such weak combat ability, yet possessing such advanced appraisal skills, naturally became a target for criminals. His fate is also easy to predict. He'll be sold to wealthy individuals as a private appraiser. After all, many people don't want others knowing what high-level equipment they possess, and appraisers typically charge high fees. But as a slave, the maintenance costs are much cheaper. Additionally, those below D-Class are easily brainwashed, making them very convenient to use. Jiang Changhao states that he's done this himself, which is why he's a very important person client here. After explaining, Jiang Changhao mercilessly walks past the protagonist, who quickly asks if he's willing to help. However, Jiang Changhao says he's just a customer with other business to attend to, and waves goodbye. Looking at the arrogant kidnappers before him, the protagonist feels regretful. He should never have reincarnated to this damned world in the first place. Soon, the protagonist is thrown into a second-floor room and locked up to make space for the next product. At this point, one person reminds the other that they haven't blindfolded this guy, but the other says it doesn't matter, he's surely asleep. With that, the door slowly closes. However, the protagonist, who should be asleep in their eyes, opens his eyes. The protagonist doesn't understand why they've thrown him here alone. Aren't they planning to sell him immediately? While deep in thought, a faint, flowery scent suddenly enters his nose. Following the direction of the scent, he sees a special magical artifact sitting quietly on the table. This is a tool that induces sleep, capable of affecting even B-Class awakened individuals. However, such artifacts are completely ineffective against the protagonist, a great mage. Of course, that's not important. What matters is escaping from here first. The protagonist struggles to untie his shoelace, biting one end and stepping on the other. Then he begins frantically rubbing the bandage binding his hands. Finally, perseverance pays off, and he successfully frees his hands. The first thing the protagonist needs to do next is call the police. After all, even if he's immune to brainwashing, being sold is still dangerous. But he searches everywhere and can't find a phone. Thinking about it, that makes sense. How could kidnappers make such a basic mistake? At this moment, the protagonist can't help but look at the sleep-inducing magical artifact nearby. Then he walks over and picks it up. Indeed, if he wants to escape, this is the only thing he can use. Meanwhile, two kidnappers are guarding outside a corridor. Initially bored, they suddenly sense something and turn around abruptly. Behind them, they see a golden light rising and smell a fragrance in the air. Upon seeing this, the two quickly cover their mouths and noses, standing vigilantly. But before they can figure out what's happening, an object like a meteor hammer suddenly strikes one of them in the face. At this point, the other finally realizes what's happening. Unfortunately, it's too late. Intense drowsiness sweeps over his entire body. Then the protagonist emerges from the doorway carrying the magical artifact. This thing is quite useful indeed. Afraid of being discovered, the protagonist immediately starts looking for an exit. Just then, his foot suddenly kicks something. Bending down to look, it's a phone. How fortunate. The protagonist immediately dials the emergency number to report the crime. Soon the call connects, and the voice on the other end asks what's happening. Hearing this, the protagonist immediately says he's been kidnapped and needs rescue. However, the other side seems unable to hear anything, and keeps asking him to speak louder. No matter how much the protagonist raises his voice, it's the same. This makes the protagonist wonder if the phone is broken. If the call won't work, then perhaps a text message will? The message sends successfully, but the reply is mechanical. Message received, may take some time to arrive. For emergencies, please call 112. Another message yields the same result, making the protagonist uneasy. Did they actually receive his message? To be safe, he sends another message to Enrun Sheng. Then he picks up the magical artifact and begins his escape journey. Currently, two other traffickers are patrolling this floor, but they suddenly notice something's wrong. Why is there fog ahead? At the same time, a yellow-haired man emerges. Who is this? Do they have anyone with yellow hair among them? The protagonist won't wait for them to figure it out and once again spins the magical artifact like a meteor hammer. Then he fiercely hurls it at one of them. The next second, that person suffers a direct hit to the face. Truly impressive accuracy. At this point, the other person finally reacts. This guy is the awakened individual they kidnapped. But it's already too late. The protagonist, who retrieved the artifact through its chain, presses it directly against the man's face. Another double kill achievement unlocked. The magical artifact face smash really works well. Next, he needs to quickly find an exit to escape. But it's truly difficult in this building where even the windows are blocked. Just at this moment, the protagonist suddenly startles, because he feels a massive magical power coming from behind him. This feeling is that of a space gate, Thinking that space gates are usually located on mountains or in open outdoor spaces, the protagonist decides to use it as a landmark to escape. But before he can act, a group of people appears behind him. It seems his escape has been discovered. The protagonist hurriedly runs down the stairs to the floor below. Unfortunately, at this critical moment, his leg suddenly begins to spasm painfully. This causes the protagonist to break out in a cold sweat. Damn, he hasn't even started running yet. And in this brief moment, the people behind have already caught up. They angrily point at the protagonist. A mere F-class daring to run away is truly seeking death. However, when they clearly see what's in the protagonist's hand, they all display terrified expressions. They quickly hold their breath, while the protagonist says it's too late to notice now. With that, he once again throws the magical artifact like a meteor hammer. But this time, the protagonist miscalculated. One of them is of a higher rank and catches the flying artifact with one hand. Then he rushes toward the protagonist and uses his other hand to violently pin him against the wall. At this point, he no longer cares about regulations against damaging merchandise. He's going to teach the protagonist a lesson. Who would have thought that the protagonist would grab the man's arm, then deliver a knee strike directly to his chin, causing him to immediately roll his eyes upward. Then he falls straight backward onto the ground. Looking at the knocked out guy and the others who were put to sleep, the protagonist can't help but sigh, this is fucking exhausting. After resting for a while, the protagonist picks up the magical artifact from the ground, only to discover a problematic situation. The artifact has exhausted its magical power. If he gets caught again, he'll be in trouble. Just then, the protagonist suddenly notices a door behind him, with that massive magical power emanating from beyond it. Behind this door is a space gate. It must be the exit. The protagonist, who finally saw hope, threw away the useless magic props and walked towards the door tremblingly. Fortunately, the door isn't locked. With an excited heart, he pushes it open. However, the scene before him leaves him stunned. He sees Zhang Changhao and a group of people appear before his eyes. What's going on? How is the space gate indoors? And Zhang Changhao is here too, this is bad. Seeing the merchandise escaping, the boss is very angry and scolds his subordinates for their management. The scolded subordinate questions the protagonist, how did you get here? What did you do to the people upstairs? Did one person take down that many? Are you perhaps falsely reporting your rank? Seeing they haven't discovered he used the artifact and knocked those people out, the protagonist was originally planning to bluff his way to escape. Unfortunately, with Zhang Changhao present, his method is destined to fail. Even worse, the trafficker boss shamelessly asks Zhang Changhao to intervene. The protagonist can only despise him for this, ordering a round of VIP, as if he would help. Who would have thought that Zhang Changhao would smile and agree? In gratitude, the boss says he can sell the protagonist to Zhang Changhao at a discount. Then Zhang Changhao walks up to the protagonist and says, "Did you hear that? He says he'll sell you cheaply. What will you do? Do you want to escape now? There's a path behind you. If you run desperately, I'll let you go." However, the protagonist's next words leave him stunned. "Zhang Changhao, have you ever seen me run?" Hearing this, Zhang Changhao looks at him seriously, not once. Coming to his senses, Zhang Changhao looks at the other with a spirit full of fighting intent. "Then let's have a match right here." Who would have thought the protagonist would directly surrender? "No, I don't think we need to fight here." Hearing this, Zhang Changhao looks down at the protagonist. "You knocked out everyone upstairs and walked to this point. How am I supposed to believe your surrender?" His concern is reasonable. If it were the protagonist, he wouldn't easily believe it either. Just as the protagonist is thinking about what to do next, he suddenly feels magical energy approaching. He and Zhang Changhao simultaneously turn to look to the side. They see a man walking out of a spatial passage. At first, the protagonist thought it was a space gate. But upon reflection, it's not a space gate but a magical passage, a spatial movement skill. The newcomer steps forward to greet their boss. At this moment, Zhang Changhao steps forward and asks, "Is this the transporter?" The boss proudly introduces him to Zhang Changhao. He possesses a spatial movement skill that can transport people, a rare sorcerer. Hearing this, Zhang Changhao smiles. "I didn't expect to meet the real person." Similarly, the boss introduces Zhang Changhao to the transporter. As the few of them chat animatedly, the suddenly neglected protagonist is thinking of using this opportunity to escape. Who would have thought that Zhang Changhao would suddenly strike, taking advantage of the transporter's attempt to shake hands with him? With full force, he punches the other's neck, directly sending him flying. This sudden development leaves the protagonist shocked. The trafficker organization's boss looks at Zhang Changhao with a terrible expression, questioning what he's doing. However, Zhang Changhao, who was just very enthusiastic, now looks at them like ants. It turns out his target all along was to eliminate this person. To do so, he spent a considerable amount of time gaining these people's trust. After all, spatial awakened individuals are too slippery. They immediately escape at the slightest sign of trouble, making it difficult to find an opportunity to strike. As the saying goes, a counselor enters the game with his own body, and he can win half the battle. In this game, Zhang Changhao has won. The protagonist watches this scene with a puzzled expression, not understanding what's happening. In fact, Zhang Changhao doesn't care whether these people engage in smuggling or illegally occupy space gates. But transporting awakened individuals overseas is another matter entirely. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, a subordinate reminds the boss to quickly escape through the space gate. However, what responds to him is Zhang Changhao's merciless punch. The The protagonist calmly watches from the side. Indeed, no one can stand against this guy. An S-class isn't for nothing. Initially, the Hunter Association's rank system only went from F to A. But suddenly one day, hunters with terrifying powers far exceeding A-class appeared one after another. This type of extraordinary rank was finally designated as S-class. Without a doubt, they are at the top of Earth's food chain. In the blink of an eye, only the boss of the trafficking organization remains conscious. He trembles and begs Jiang Changhao to spare him. However, Jiang Changhao is no saint. How could he agree to such an absurd request? Listening to the screams from beside him, the protagonist once again realizes that he indeed shouldn't have provoked this guy. Just then, both the protagonist and Jiang Changhao suddenly startle, because police sirens sound from outside. Police? Jiang Changhao looks at the protagonist in panic. You called the police? The protagonist suddenly remembers doing so and nods in admission. Hearing this, Jiang Changhao looks at him in disbelief, as if seeing something incredible. You called the police for something in society? The protagonist is completely baffled by the problem. Soon, Jiang Changhao calms down. He explains that he's only here to prevent these people from selling awakened individuals abroad, warning the protagonist not to associate him with this organization. Hearing this, the protagonist says this is the police's job. Hearing the word police, Jiang Changhao is very dissatisfied. You don't know how slow these guys usually are. Normally, even if you report to the police, it would take at least a few days to locate the place. I don't know why they're so quick this time. With this, Jiang Changhao thought the protagonist had done something in advance. Although he's curious, now isn't the time for more words. He pats the protagonist's shoulder, then turns and leaves without looking back. Seeing this, the protagonist is alarmed and asks him to wait. But Jiang Changhao seems to hear nothing. The protagonist curses inwardly, damn it. How am I supposed to explain all this to the police by myself? Soon, a large number of police rush in. Then they treat the protagonist as the prime suspect, immediately restraining him. They warn the protagonist not to use his abilities and demand to know where the hostages are. Although the protagonist explains that he's the one who reported the crime, they don't believe him at all. The protagonist is speechless about this. Is it really okay to treat a kind alien like this? At this critical moment, an angelic voice suddenly reaches the protagonist's ears. Wait, a breathless Miss Xuan Yuyan runs in. Looking at the detained protagonist, Xuan Yuyan steps forward to testify. It was indeed he who called the police. This time the police believe without any doubt. They unlock the handcuffs for the protagonist and apologize. To this, the protagonist only wants to shout, I told you so. However, the protagonist is curious about why Xuan Yuyan is here, and she raises her phone to show him. It turns out Rensheng received the protagonist's distress message, but he was on his way to suppress a dungeon riot and couldn't come personally, so he passed this matter to Xuan Yuyan. Then Xuan Yuyan found this place through her tracking skill. No wonder the police arrived so quickly. While Xuan Yuyan is explaining, a loud shout suddenly comes from the side. It turns out the police have discovered through comparison that these people are all wanted human traffickers. They are the organization recently making headlines for selling awakened individuals overseas, and this place seems to be their meeting point. Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan is shocked. What? She's heard of this organization, extremely difficult to track, and now this organization seems to have been mostly wiped out. At this moment, the police captain steps forward to ask the protagonist, Did you do all this? The protagonist immediately denies, Not me, it was that madman Jiang Changhao. Hearing this, the captain looks unconvinced. What about all those people lying up there? Weren't they also your doing? The protagonist breaks out in a cold sweat. Those were mine? The captain asks the protagonist to explain clearly. With no choice, the protagonist can only tell the truth. He speaks with a cold arrogance. Actually, I did all this to protect myself. At this point, another police officer picks up the magical artifact that the protagonist discarded and asks if it belongs to him. Meanwhile, Xuan Yuyan falls into deep thought. Come to think of it, this guy wasn't tied up, and he appeared in the boss's room. Plus, he was the one who reported the crime. Looking at his body with no injuries whatsoever, and his transcendent attitude despite almost being sold overseas, Xuan Yuyan can't help but become suspicious. Was he really kidnapped? Could it be that all of this was within his plan from the beginning? After emergency handling, the human trafficking incident concludes. As a hostage, the protagonist successfully puts the entire organization behind bars. At the same time, he also gains a substantial reward, a free B-class sleep-inducing magical artifact. The reason is that the police don't know the effect of this item, and mistakenly identify the protagonist as its owner. This type of magical artifact is rare, and it can be recharged and used. The protagonist is very satisfied with this. Although due to Jiang Changhao's escape, he had to face the police's paperwork alone. It was all worth it. The only slight regret is that this thing only works on humans, not animals or monsters. Just then, with a beeping sound, the protagonist excitedly turns around to see green steam rising from a kettle. He hurriedly goes to turn off the gas stove. Then, with an excited heart, he pours the boiling water directly into a cup. Success. What a perfect color. He carefully admires his work. Who would have thought that on this remote planet he could still create this? He truly is a once-in-a-generation prodigy. It turns out this green substance is a mana amplifier. Drinking it temporarily increases magical power. Just like a lighter's flint, it can provide the initial energy. The protagonist lifts the cup and drinks it all at once. Then he carefully feels the changes in his body. Good. His breathing is smooth. Although this potion's effect only lasts for 5 minutes, it's enough to complete one spell. Then the protagonist uses his first magic since arriving on Earth. First, he heals the leg ailment in his right leg. Then he casts a spell to maintain physical health and suppress aging. As the magic ends, the protagonist excitedly jumps around. Indeed, there's no pain at all now, but he can't be too happy yet, because he's just confirmed one thing. This body's mana capacity is truly terrible. Using just one low-level spell has depleted all the mana. This body's mana conversion efficiency is too low, and he can't frequently use amplifiers. But looking on the bright side, at least it worked this time, right? When things go well, spirits are high. He should eat something to celebrate. The protagonist is about to check what's left in the refrigerator when suddenly there's a knock at the door. Initially, he thought it might be Xuan Yuyan again. Who would have thought that upon opening the door, it's an elderly man? Through the original body's memories, the protagonist recalls, this is the landlord. He quickly greets the old man. The old man first apologizes for the intrusion, then asks the protagonist cordially, are you also not paying the rent this month? It turns out the original tenant hasn't paid rent for over 3 months, owing a total of 1.35 million. If you add water, electricity, property fees, and other miscellaneous costs, it's at least 2 million. Despite this, the old man still lets the protagonist stay until the end of the month, only moving out if he truly can't pay. Never in his life has he met such a good landlord. Once, he was fortunate enough to encounter a landlord who refunded the full deposit, which was already almost moving. After seeing off the elderly landlord, the protagonist returns to his room with a worried expression. This is bad, he's about to become homeless. There are only 14 days left until the end of the month. Is there any way to make money? Preferably something buried in the ground that someone forgot to dig up. Thinking about this, a flash of inspiration suddenly hits the protagonist. He lunges for his phone. That's right, there's still that. Then he makes a call to Jiang Changhao. He wants to get his compensation back. Jiang Changhao, who is enjoying a big meal, receives the protagonist's call and takes a good while to recall the traffic accident. Then without much fuss, he directly asks the protagonist how much money he needs. Hearing this, the protagonist checks online and sees someone suggesting to start by asking for 3 million. Thinking further, he needs 2 million, and the other person still owes him quite a bit, so asking for more shouldn't be a problem, right? After not hearing a reply for a while, Jiang Changhao says, if you don't speak, I'm hanging up. Hearing this, the protagonist nervously asks, is 3 million okay? At this moment, Jiang Changhao feels underestimated. You're actually asking me if 3 million is okay? After hanging up, he immediately transfers 3 million to the other party. The protagonist excitedly looks at the transaction notification. He can't believe he obtained such a large sum of money so easily. But soon he calms down, because after solving the rent issue, there's not much left. Thinking about this, tears inadvertently flow from the corners of the protagonist's eyes. Is there any way for an ordinary person to make money quickly? Just then, a phone call comes in. The protagonist sees it's from Runsheng. Thinking that he hasn't thanked him for his help earlier, could it be that he's contacting me first out of concern? The protagonist is about to answer the call when he suddenly thinks of something important. It seems like an A-class hunter's next dungeon could earn tens of billions, right? Thinking of this money-making method, the protagonist decisively arranges to meet with Runsheng. First, he thanks Runsheng for contacting Xuan Yuyan to save his life. As a thank you, the protagonist offers to treat Runsheng to a meal. Hearing that his big brother is treating him, Runsheng is excited but only orders a cup of coffee to save the protagonist money. The protagonist outwardly agrees but inwardly curses. This is even worse than eating with me. Just smelling coffee makes him want to vomit now. Then Runsheng orders an iced coffee, while the protagonist asks for a latte. And he emphasizes strongly, just a latte, no coffee, don't add anything with coffee flavor. And Runsheng listens with confusion. The waiter breaks out in a cold sweat and says he'll try his best. The protagonist doesn't understand the strange reactions from the two around him. What's wrong? Have I exposed my alien side? In the end, the protagonist gets his coffee-free latte as desired. The two first engage in small talk to liven up the atmosphere, then the protagonist gets straight to the point. Runsheng, you seem to only be suppressing dungeon riots lately. Besides the few times with me, how long has it been since you entered a space gate? Hearing this, Runsheng begins to stammer, unable to speak clearly. The protagonist looks at him seriously. As I thought, are you afraid to enter space gates? And Runsheng's response is as expected. He can't go into dungeons for now. The protagonist can understand this well. After all, suddenly encountering high-level monsters, then experiencing betrayal from companions, that brush with death and its terror, is truly too cruel for a college student just over 20 years old. But Runsheng, you can't always follow me, an F-class hunter. The protagonist looks at him solemnly. You'll eventually need to form your own team, or prepare to become a lone wolf, right? Hearing the protagonist's words, and Runsheng's expression immediately drops. He thought the protagonist wanted to abandon him. However, the protagonist isn't a fool. How could he push away a free powerhouse? He takes a sip of his coffee-free latte and continues. If you're willing, I want to train you. I can guide you in using magic and skills. What do you think? Hearing this, and Runsheng immediately becomes excited. Is this true? I'd be delighted, seeing how easily the big fish has taken the bait. The protagonist is inwardly excited. I truly am a genius. Since the decision is made, they immediately begin looking for a suitable dungeon. The D-Class Dungeon Ancient Roman Temple, not far from the coffee shop, is the best choice. Because the drop rate is very low, it's an unpopular dungeon. But for this very reason, it's perfect for training. Before formally beginning, the protagonist asks Enrunsheng to demonstrate his main skills first. Hearing this, Enrunsheng first calms his nerves. Then he uses his main ability, Guardian Shield. This is a defense completely made of magical power. The more magical power consumed, the stronger the defense. Enrunsheng carefully asks the protagonist how it looks. The protagonist stares at the shield in silence for a moment, then poses a question: why does it only protect the front? Enrunsheng doesn't understand why he's asking this. Because this skill has been like this since I awakened. The protagonist understands now. The other is like a monkey using a tool for the first time. He knows nothing. So he decides to start teaching from skill understanding, beginning with this shield. This skill is meant to protect the entire body, not just block from the front. However, Enrunsheng simply cannot understand. Although his shield can grow larger, he cannot change its shape. The protagonist is nearly angered to death and inwardly curses, "You idiot." Then he asks Enrunsheng to try again, and guides him to use his chest as the central part of the skill, expanding spherical magical power like a crystal ball. Enrunsheng tries this method but still fails. Yet the protagonist pats his shoulder and encourages him to continue. He reminds him to firmly remember the image he wants in his mind. Seeing the protagonist's serious expression, Enrunsheng regains his spirit. Thus, through repeated difficult attempts, Enrunsheng finally successfully releases a spherical shield. Having achieved success for the first time, he is very excited. However, he only moves one step, and the shield shatters with a crash. At this, Enrunsheng instantly becomes dejected, but the protagonist says it's fine. Because once you succeed once, all that's left is to raise your proficiency. Enrunsheng is very grateful for the protagonist's help. "I never thought my skill could be used this way." The protagonist tells him that skills can change according to the user's ideas. The practitioner's thoughts have a great influence on magical power. So those with a slightly vain and arrogant heart have a higher chance of becoming great mages. Just like me, this genius. Just as the protagonist's little vanity is exploding, Enrunsheng suddenly asks what training they should do next. The protagonist says they'll now proceed with practical combat training. Only by frequently using skills against monsters can proficiency be rapidly improved. And so, Enrunsheng begins solo farming small monsters. In battle after battle, his spherical shield becomes increasingly proficient, finally reaching a level where it doesn't shatter even when moving. Meanwhile, the protagonist cheers from the side. "Good, well done," as expected of an A-class possessing overwhelming combat power. Besides this, the protagonist has something more important to do. That is, picking up dropped crystal equipment. These can all be sold for money, using skill training as an excuse to pick up the loot dropped from monsters killed by the A-class hunter. Alias, stealing someone else's spoils of war. This is the meaning of teaching. In no time, the protagonist has collected a bag full of magic crystals. These are enough for a month's living expenses. Compared to directly borrowing money from Enrunsheng or repeatedly asking him to help kill monsters, this method is clearly better. Otherwise, if the A-class hunter becomes unhappy, wouldn't he be finished? After secretly collecting all the equipment, the protagonist asks Enrunsheng how he's doing and if he's grasped the essentials. However, Enrunsheng's reaction makes the protagonist feel a bit strange. The protagonist is quite nervous about this. Has he discovered my little trick? But he didn't know that Enrunsheng's inner thoughts were surging in his life. Enrunsheng has never felt a sense of awe. Whether it was his academic teachers or celebrities praised on TV, he only slightly marveled. So there are such impressive people in the world. But today, Enrunsheng finally understands the meaning of this word. This is simply incomprehensible. Just by watching his skill once, he deduced its hidden usage. And his teaching is as natural as breathing. He's never even heard of the ability to discover others' hidden skills. Yet the other isn't an analysis-type awakened individual. If he closes his eyes, he can still see someone calmly taking out the heart of an A-class golem. So all of this is due to the other's keen eye and rich knowledge. Big Brother is truly not an ordinary person. At this moment, Enrunsheng's heart is filled with awe. Just as Enrunsheng is in shock, the protagonist's voice suddenly reaches his ears. "Runsheng, what's wrong? Are you starting to grasp the trick now?" At this moment, Enrunsheng feels very embarrassed. Faced with his brother's careful teaching, he hasn't even mastered one skill well. Then he bows to the protagonist and apologizes. "I'm sorry, Big Brother. I'll practice to perfection as soon as possible." He expected the protagonist to be disappointed, but who would have thought the protagonist would calmly say, "Runsheng, don't rush. If you can't do it today, you can continue tomorrow or the day after. After all, I'm just F-class, I have plenty of time." At this moment, the protagonist's figure in Enrunsheng's eyes is so tall. When he lost confidence, not only did the other unhesitatingly impart experience, but he even fears burdening him, telling such an obvious lie. Enrunsheng secretly vows to repay this kindness. Then he asks the protagonist if there's anything he wants or needs Enrunsheng to do. Hearing this, the protagonist breaks out in a cold sweat and says there really isn't anything. This response is within Enrunsheng's expectations. His big brother is just that selfless. He wouldn't be like those people in modern society who are moved by a little money. When he first awakened with A-class ability, he thought he could handle anything well. Only now does he realize how naive he was. Understanding this, and Runsheng no longer forces himself. Let's just follow what Big Brother said today. Then he happily said to the protagonist, let's go back, Big Brother. At this point, he's made up his mind. He must train hard. One day, he will help his big brother. Unlike in Runsheng, who has completed his self-development, the protagonist is filled with unease. Why did he ask if I wanted anything? Has he noticed something? But judging by his reaction, he seems to have no interest in these things. Perhaps for an A-class hunter, these are simply not worth mentioning. If that's the case, can we enter higher-level space gates next? Just thinking about this makes the protagonist excited. Besides, today's harvest is already enough for the upcoming rent. With an anticipating heart, he prepares to go back and treat himself to something good. This good mood lasts until after the two exit the space gate, because an unexpected person appears before them. The protagonist doesn't understand why Xuan Yuyan would appear here. Xuan Yuyan first looks at her watch and then speaks. Hello, Hunter and Runsheng. You came out quite late just for a D-class space gate. Originally, she came here to notify an Runsheng about something, but now there's a problem. She looks seriously at the protagonist. Why is an F rank like you appearing here? You were just under investigation for falsely reporting your rank, and as soon as you're cleared of suspicion, you illegally enter a spatial gate. Caught red-handed, the protagonist breaks into a cold sweat. Damn, he's been caught at the entrance. He quickly explains that he entered the spatial gate as a porter to help Runsheng collect items, while Runsheng also vouches for him. But Xuan Yuyan doesn't believe a word of it. Stop making excuses. How much can that backpack of yours actually hold? Of course, Runsheng doesn't escape a lecture either. Helping a hunter illegally enter a spatial gate is also against the law. Although this is exactly what happened, the protagonist still tries to argue. He points out that the association hasn't placed any restrictions on porters, but Xuan Yuyan shows no mercy. That's because those rules are designed for real porters, not for people looking to exploit loopholes. She looks sternly at the protagonist. Don't you understand that this kind of behavior only invites more suspicion? You have to know that ordinary F-rank hunters don't casually break the rules because they value their lives. This disregard for rank classification inevitably raises questions. Xuan Yuyan tells them to cooperate. The protagonist reluctantly agrees, while Runsheng, who had just sworn to become stronger alongside him, nearly bursts into tears. All along, Xuan Yuyan has been too lenient with the protagonist, making him almost forget that. This girl before him is B rank, capable of tearing a lion apart with her bare hands, so angering her would do no one any good. In the end, Xuan Yuyan only warns them, then asks Runsheng to come with her. She has notifications about changes to the instance area he's responsible for suppressing. And so Runsheng tearfully waves goodbye to the protagonist. Watching their retreating figures, the protagonist realizes that his money-making scheme probably won't work anymore. But it's not a big problem. He already has a plan B prepared. Just as the protagonist turns away, Xuan Yuyan secretly glances back. What a mysterious man. The next morning, the first thing the protagonist does is lie in bed scrolling through his phone. Collecting hunter information through his phone has become a habit. This time, he receives useful news. An item has finally been analyzed. This bracelet, called the Twin Guardian Angel, was first discovered in that X-rank instance. The protagonist has been keeping it, originally intending to compensate Zheng Shaxing for it. But after all this time, the other party probably doesn't need it anymore. Today, the protagonist puts it on for the first time. It fits perfectly around his wrist. The reason he's wearing it is because today's experiment is somewhat dangerous. The protagonist arrives alone at a spatial gate, never having thought he'd be so nervous without a bodyguard, even though this is the lowest F-rank gate. Spatial gates are generally divided into two types, red and blue. This is a blue type, where no boss exists. Small monsters continuously appear in the vast area, and once a certain number are eliminated, the gate closes. Even the protagonist can freely enter and exit here. It's a good practice ground. Today, he's here to farm monsters. Although Xuan Yuyan's warning has stopped his quick money-making method, it doesn't matter. Killing these F-rank creatures can still earn him some living expenses. The protagonist enters the spatial gate and finds himself under blue skies with endless grasslands stretching before him. Not far away from him, a group of monsters were eating grass quietly. They are natives here called malfunctioning goats. They're named this way because the sounds they make resemble broken violins. Despite their gentle appearance, they're among the most dangerous F-rank monsters, making them quite valuable. With this in mind, the protagonist opens a bottle of magic power amplifier and drinks it in one gulp. He immediately feels the familiar power spreading throughout his body. The powerful magical energy surrounding him inevitably attracts the monster's attention. But it's too late for them because the protagonist's casting speed is faster than anyone else's. He extends his index finger, forming a small flame at the tip. The flame shoots out like a bullet, growing larger and eventually becoming a scorching fireball. The protagonist calmly watches this scene. Turn to ash, monster. As his words fall, the fireball gets closer to its target, appearing as if it really could burn the creature to death. However, just as the fireball makes contact with the target, it abruptly vanishes into thin air. This outcome completely surprises the protagonist, leaving him momentarily unsure how to react. A wisp of black smoke slowly rose from the forehead of the goat that was attacked for no reason. This makes it furious. Its veins bulge and white smoke pours from its nostrils. With a clearly life or death stance, it charges directly at the protagonist. Seeing this, the protagonist is almost scared to death. A shriek escapes his mouth. He runs while complaining, "Damn it, I knew this would happen. F-rank magic power really is useless." He runs while looking back, terrified the creature might catch up at any moment. Somehow this thing is running incredibly fast. Fortunately, he manages to escape through the spatial gate just before being caught. Having successfully escaped, the protagonist looks back breathlessly. Good thing the monster didn't follow him out. He pants heavily. This body is in worse condition than he imagined. Just this short run nearly killed him from exhaustion. Just as the protagonist recovers, a voice reaches his ears. He turns around to find a strange man looking at him excitedly. "Bro, it's really you. Long time no see." The protagonist is confused. This seems to be his first time meeting this guy. The man grabs his hand familiarly and explains that they once took the hunter qualification exam together. Although the protagonist has no recollection, as they converse, more and more fragments appear in his mind. This indicates that the man was indeed someone the original body's owner knew. He decides not to speak but to observe the situation first. The other party kept talking a lot, with no intention of stopping. This makes the protagonist feel irritated. Doesn't this guy realize he's talking to an alien in human skin? Finally, the man says that meeting like this is fate and invites the protagonist to join his team. They happen to be short one person today. He points in a direction, indicating his teammates. Where he's pointing, there are 3 fully armed hunters. Among them, the one with the strongest magic power carrying an axe is the team leader, a D-rank hunter. The young man asks the protagonist what he thinks. If he agrees, they can enter the instance immediately. For a weak hunter, there's no more effective strategy than group hunting. However, the protagonist chooses to decline because he's already used up today's magic power amplifier. Surprisingly, even after honestly saying his magic power is depleted, the other person shows no hesitation. "That's fine. We're not looking for someone to hunt anyway." It turns out they need a porter to help collect items, and they're offering a high daily wage. Hearing that he only needs to carry things to earn money, the protagonist immediately becomes excited. He thinks this proposal is good. He can join a regular hunter team and observe how they hunt. But he fails to notice the sinister, cunning expression on the man's face. The protagonist ultimately accepts the proposal and follows them back into the instance. Then he spends 3 interesting hours watching the battle from the sidelines. The small team coordinates well, with each person playing an important role in their position. Simple, comfortable, and safe, like skilled primitive humans hunting a mammoth. After the hunt, the team leader takes the package from the protagonist. He generously praises him for doing a good job, much better than their previous irresponsible porter. He then counts out a stack of bills and counts them in front of the male protagonist. Then handed them to the protagonist. The protagonist feels somewhat embarrassed. It seems too much for a porter. The leader laughs heartily, saying, "You deserve it." He then asks if the protagonist is free tomorrow, as finding a new porter would be troublesome. He invites the protagonist to continue joining them, but while saying this, his gaze fixes firmly on the twin guardian angel bracelet on the protagonist's wrist. New to Earth, the protagonist hasn't yet learned the principle of not flaunting wealth. He remains completely unaware that his golden bracelet has caught the attention of several scoundrels. In the hunter world, there are occasionally those who abandon hunting dangerous monsters, and instead target rookie hunters who aren't familiar with instances, and spend large sums on protective equipment. The way they hunt their own kind resembles frogs, so calling them frogs couldn't be more appropriate. Even more disgusting is that they don't just rob equipment. Many take pleasure in killing. The protagonist has undoubtedly been targeted by such a group. Time quickly moves to the next day. The protagonist arrives at the agreed-upon location. His feelings are complicated. Whenever he sees the man claiming to be his friend, he always remembers something. "Oh, you're here early," says the familiar face from yesterday. The protagonist asks if today's payment will be the same as yesterday's. "Of course, I specifically exchanged for brand new bills," the leader replies enthusiastically. With hopeful expectations, the protagonist enters a new F-rank instance with them. And that's when he witnesses the ugliness of human nature. After resolving the monsters and exhausting the protagonist's usefulness, these people stop pretending. The leader smashes a bottle against the back of the protagonist's head. This sudden blow instantly brings the protagonist to his knees. At this point, the protagonist still doesn't understand what's happening. Do these damn earthlings all like hitting their own kind? Seeing that the protagonist hasn't passed out from this blow, the hunters aren't in a hurry. The liquid in the bottle is a strong sedative. Just a few more seconds and it should take effect. But they miscalculated. As a former Grand Archmage, the protagonist is immune to sedative mental attacks. After some time passes and the target still hasn't fallen unconscious, the hunting team finally realizes something's wrong. Faced with this situation, the protagonist chooses the 36th stratagem. Retreat is the best option. While the group is still trying to process what's happening, he immediately gets up and runs. Although the protagonist successfully gains the initiative, he is ultimately just an ordinary person. He's quickly caught by a vine and suspended in midair. The one who made this move is the black-haired young man who claimed to be his good friend. When the protagonist lands again, a huge axe appears before him. Seeing this, he instinctively raises both hands and asks why they're doing this. Then he notices that everyone is staring at his left hand. The protagonist looks helplessly at the twin guardian angel on his wrist. "Don't tell me." Next, he waves his hand to the left. Sure enough, everyone sways to the left. Then he waves to the right, and everyone follows to the right. "Fine, I get it." So it's all because of this bracelet. This bracelet can block any attack twice, even from S-rank monsters. Equipment meant to protect himself has instead brought disaster. Of course, he can't hand it over because they would certainly destroy all evidence. So facing their threats, the protagonist chooses to refuse. Don't move, or I'll use up its 2 defense charges. Once used up, it will lose its magical effect and become an ordinary accessory. However, these words not only fail to work, but actually enrage the D-rank hunter. He puts down his axe and kicks the protagonist flying. Are you joking? A mere Frank like you trying to use such an item? The sharp sound of fists hitting facial bones echoes through the cave. With each blow, he curses. Hey, use it, you bastard. Use it. Your death comes as soon as you use up the equipment's charges. What follows is a merciless beating. If this continues, the protagonist will certainly be beaten to death. With no choice, he shouts loudly, "Wait! I'll give you the equipment. Just stop!" Hearing this, the D-rank hunter grins. That's more like it. Violence really is the most effective solution to problems. The protagonist raises his trembling hand. Is this the reality for F-rank hunters? How pitiful to have no power. His hand touches the bracelet. Just turning this over will end everything, possibly including his life. Just as he's about to give up struggling, suddenly footsteps echo from a distance. Who could be barging in at this time? The hunting team looks back, and they break into a cold sweat because the person who appears next is beyond everyone's expectations. The protagonist is equally shocked. Why is he here? The person who suddenly appears is none other than A-rank hunter and Runsheng. He's stunned by the scene before him. It turns out that before entering the instance, the protagonist had contacted Runsheng for help with his skills and asked him to wait at the instance entrance. Upon receiving the message, Runsheng was extremely excited. He had thought he was no longer valuable, but was surprised that the big brother still valued him as before. He understands his position clearly. He's the big brother's ticket into high-rank instances. Since they were caught last time, he thought the big brother wouldn't look for him again. Unexpectedly, the big brother was still willing to spare precious time to guide him on skills. Indeed, the big brother is his destined benefactor. As thanks, he specifically bought a coffee for the big brother. Then Runsheng waited at the instance entrance, but after half a day, the protagonist still hadn't come out. This made Runsheng feel something was wrong. A mere F-rank instance shouldn't take this much time. Could it be that an abnormal mutation occurred, suddenly raising the instance level? Although such situations rarely happen, to be safe, he decided to go in and check. He banished the negative emotions in his heart and carefully walked through the door. However, what happened next exceeded his imagination. He saw his respected big brother being bullied by a group of thugs. This scene made Runsheng gasp. The person who always seemed in control now suffered serious injuries with blood flowing freely. Could this be an illusion? But these thoughts could wait. More important than this chaotic scene was, "You're frogs, aren't you?" Within Runsheng's icy voice, violent magical power swirls around his body. Then he walks step by step toward the seemingly strongest guy. He grimly grabs the man's skull. The next moment, he violently throws him away. Although Runsheng has never hit anyone in his life, for an A-rank hunter dealing with a team whose highest rank is D, the only concern is controlling his strength, to avoid killing them with a single blow. Soon Runsheng resolves all combat, but his feelings are now mixed. No matter how you look at it, these guys were too weak. Just as he's puzzled, the protagonist's voice reaches his ears. "Runsheng, thank you. If not for you, I would have been finished. Big brother?" And Runsheng turns back in surprise to see the protagonist walking toward him, battered but intact. Despite the bloody face, the protagonist's voice remains as calm as ever. "Did you come in looking for me?" And Runsheng replies, "Yes." However, the protagonist's next words stun him. "I'm sorry. Weren't you scared entering the instance alone? Thanks for your trouble." At this moment, Runsheng suddenly realizes he hasn't entered an instance alone for a very long time. Usually, just hearing the word instance terrifies him. But this time, his mind filled with concerns about the big brother potentially trapped in a mutated instance, he rushed in without thinking. Could all this have been part of the big brother's plan? At this point, the protagonist says they should leave the instance and report these guys as soon as they get out. Only now does Runsheng notice something odd. Even when attacked by hunters, the big brother never showed any surprise from beginning to end, as if everything was expected. Everything seems to have been arranged in advance. But he doesn't voice his doubts because the big brother has no reason to deliberately set up such things. Just then, the protagonist speaks softly. "Runsheng, if my rank were higher, I'd definitely team up with you. Not only are you strong, but more importantly, you always think about how to save people. I hope you understand, you're an incredible awakened one." These simple words move Runsheng to tears. Thinking carefully, why hasn't he formed a new team and remained stagnant all this time? As a defense-type hunter who failed to protect his teammates, he couldn't communicate with new hunters. Precisely at this moment, something happened that required rescuing a friend in danger. So the big brother deliberately created a situation similar to what happened before, creating a successful experience for him. Thus, Runsheng conquered himself through self-rationalization. Yes, this was all the big brother's plan. The wounds on the big brother's body were self-inflicted for the act. Who would have thought someone could go to such lengths for others? Understanding everything, Runsheng speaks with difficulty. "Big brother, why do you always look after me so much?" Hearing this, the protagonist seems puzzled. "Look after you?" And Runsheng nods affirmatively. "Is that so?" The protagonist stops walking. Because you're a good person. That's enough. As expected of my big brother. And Runsheng looks at the protagonist with admiration. And so the two step out of the spatial gate together. Finally outside, the protagonist asks Runsheng to report to the police. Then, while Runsheng is making the call, he says, "Sorry, let's start training tomorrow. I need to go home first." Hearing this, Runsheng is shocked. Home? Shouldn't you go to the hospital first? But the protagonist waves his hand saying, "No need, I can handle it myself." Without waiting for Runsheng's response, he quickly walks away. And Runsheng watches this scene, wanting to speak but hesitating. What F rank can heal themselves? Healing potions are expensive. Could it be that he's decided to stop pretending to be frank in front of me? Meanwhile, the protagonist can only lament his misery. It hurts so much! My ribs! For the protagonist, this has been a terrible week. First kidnapped by traffickers, then encountering robbers who tried to steal his items, nearly losing his life. Who knows how many bones were broken, taking several days to finally recover. Just when he thought he could rest for a few days, today he's called in for questioning by the Hunter Association. The protagonist feels increasingly annoyed day by day. But complaints aside, nothing will change. Looking at the glowing bracelet on the table, the culprit behind the recent incident. Through investigation, the protagonist discovered it's worth billions. However, for some reason, he lacks the resolve to sell it immediately. After all, being able to nullify any attack twice, who knows when this might become crucial for survival. Especially for someone magically inept like him, who can barely withstand even slightly stronger attacks. So it's best to carry it inconspicuously from now on. The weather outside is nice, but the protagonist is in a bad mood, because as soon as he steps out, he encounters a sports car frantically honking its horn. The protagonist wonders which madman is causing such a disturbance in broad daylight. When the car window opens, it really is a madman, Jiang Changhao. He quickly averts his gaze, pretending not to see. Unfortunately, Jiang Changhao doesn't give him this opportunity. He asks the protagonist where he's going at this hour. Unable to avoid him, the protagonist reluctantly answers, "I'm going to the Hunter Association." "Oh my, it's almost time. I'm busy, so that's that." With that, the protagonist prepares to leave immediately. But a warning comes from behind. "Get in the car." As soon as Jiang Changhao finishes speaking, the protagonist swiftly sits in the passenger seat. He fastens his seatbelt, desperately trying to hide his nervousness. "I'm a civilized alien, so I decided to follow Jiang Changhao's suggestion. It's absolutely not because I'm afraid." Speaking of which, why did this guy show up at my doorstep? He carefully considers whether he's done anything wrong. He's kept the secret about Zhang Shaoxing, and didn't mention Jiang Changhao's name during the kidnapping case. There's no reason for him to be angry. Just as the protagonist is lost in thought, Jiang Changhao's voice suddenly reaches him. "I heard you were attacked by those frogs?" Is he talking about the robbers? Yes. Though curious how the other party knows, the protagonist answers the question. "I heard you were injured, so I came specifically to check." "The injuries aren't serious, are they?" Hearing this, the protagonist is startled. "Wait, what did you say you came for?" Jiang Changhao continues turning the steering wheel while saying, "I came to confirm whether you were seriously injured. This was a dangerous accident. The X-rank instance, the kidnapping." Thinking carefully, "You've hardly had any peaceful days. I'm starting to wonder if you're enjoying this exciting life." Then Jiang Changhao mentions he's brought a gift and tells the protagonist to open the storage box to see. Receiving gifts is always exciting, so the protagonist has no reason to refuse. Opening the box, he finds a crystal bottle containing liquid. Jiang Changhao explains, "This is a recovery potion. Although you don't seem to need it since I brought it, it's yours." The protagonist examines the bottle carefully. "So this is Earth's healing potion? I see." Hearing he was injured, he specifically chose this item. Similar things happen in his homeland. When his tentacles are injured, friends bring recovery potions, just like children with fevers receive antipyretics. Receiving such friendly treatment on Earth is truly unexpected. "Thank you. I'll make good use of it." Seeing the protagonist accept it, Jiang Changhao smiles. "It's just a small thing. No need to be so surprised." The protagonist simply hadn't expected someone like him to do good deeds. It's truly surprising. But he won't take this medicine. Who knows what strange ingredients it might contain. Better to take it back and study it first. Just then, with a screech, the car stops. Jiang Changhao looks at the protagonist and says, "We're here. Get out." The protagonist is startled by this sudden command. He looks around and realizes they're at a familiar building, the entrance to the Hunter Association. It seems this Earthling has brought him to his destination. Though not quite understanding the situation, if he says get out, then get out. The protagonist expresses his gratitude to Jiang Changhao, then asks a question that's been puzzling him. "Why do you take such care of me?" Meanwhile, he silently thinks, "He even threatened to kill me if I didn't provide false testimony." Hearing this question, Jiang Changhao grins. "Actually, I'm interested in developing hunters, and you're one of the most promising. So unless absolutely necessary, I don't want to harm you. You understand what I mean?" The protagonist guesses he probably wants him to continue keeping the Zhang Shaoxing matter confidential, so he nods to indicate understanding. "Very good, now hurry along. Just say you were late because you spent too long bathing." Jiang Changhao leaves this short tease before driving away. Talent development? For the sake of developing talent, not only crushing organizations that kidnap awakened ones, but immediately rushing over with medicine when hearing someone's injured? A true patriot indeed. Although he wants to say this, the reality is certainly not so simple, because an awakened one who can kill their own kind without hesitation could hardly possess such a sense of justice. The protagonist contemplates the healing potion, sinking into thought. Why would Zhang Changhao be interested in an F rank like him? However, this confusing question is suddenly resolved one day. That day, like usual, he was absorbed in browsing the internet. Then he discovered a skill, ambition, a positive word. But after reading the skill description, the protagonist couldn't be happy at all. It's a skill that kills stronger people to steal their abilities. Really, who would give such a terrible ability such a name? And at this time, the first person the protagonist thought of was Zhang Changhao. Carefully recalling what Zhang Changhao has done, first, Zhang Changhao once offered to support his hunter activities. Second, Zhang Changhao was sensitive about promising awakened ones going overseas. Third, Zhang Changhao once warned him not to die. Putting these together, it can't be. Zhang Changhao should just be a pure patriot. But no matter how he thinks about it, being targeted by an S-rank hunter isn't a good sign. So now he has only one choice. He must quickly resolve this garbage F-rank body, whether by transferring to another body or healing his lungs. Thinking of this, the protagonist becomes restless and immediately begins taking action. But research is like this. Expecting ideal results from a single experiment is almost impossible. The protagonist lies exhausted on the ground. Everything seems meaningless. He transmigrated for retirement. So why is he still working after transmigration? Why? Just as the protagonist is losing heart, the buzzing vibration of a phone comes through. He picks it up to see an unfamiliar number starting with 010. Without thinking much, he answers the call. For a long time, there's no sound from the other end. He's about to hang up when a familiar voice comes through the receiver. "It's me. Can we meet?" An hour later, in a park near the protagonist's home, he sits together with his old acquaintance Xuan Yuyan. Xuan Yuyan speaks first. "Sorry for suddenly disturbing you, but I thought it would be better to discuss this face to face." The protagonist says it's fine. Although association contacts usually bring nothing good, the protagonist owes Xuan Yuyan a favor, so he should at least hear what she has to say. Xuan Yuyan sits somewhat awkwardly on the steps and says, "I need your analysis skills. Can you help for a while?" About 2 weeks. The protagonist asks if she needs something identified. Xuan Yuyan explains it's not that. She's working with the police investigating a case. The criminals left traces in an instance, but they can't decipher them. They've already invited national-level analysts to investigate, but with no results. In fact, all the powerful analysts are with overseas companies or major guilds, and the remaining ones are of varying quality. Among the analysts Xuan Yuyan knows, only the protagonist has no guild affiliation and has cleared the magic tower maze. Then she apologizes nervously, saying they can't offer much compensation. For an analyst, it's almost like working for free. Even Xuan Yuyan saying this makes the protagonist wonder just how little it is. Won't it even cover the cost of a meal? "I know this request is unreasonable, but can you help me? I've helped you once too." However, before finishing, Xuan Yuyan takes back her words. "No, forget what I just said." The protagonist is confused by this, as he indeed owes her a favor. Xuan Yuyan explains that saving people is her duty. She shouldn't use favors as leverage, so she's willing to pay out of her own pocket to ask for the protagonist's help with the investigation. What's wrong with being a bit thick-skinned at times like these? It seems Xuan Yuyan is a person with considerable conscience. But the protagonist has a question. Because of her tracking skills, Xuan Yuyan often cooperates with the police. But even so, why is she so enthusiastic about the search? So he asks, "If you catch the criminals, will you get a bonus?" However, her answer surprises him. "No, I won't get any benefit." But shouldn't we always do our best? After all, each case affects someone's life. Xuan Yuyan speaks calmly. These words make the protagonist develop a bit of goodwill toward her. Perhaps because of being exploited by unscrupulous bosses, seeing such a pure and kind creature immediately makes him view her with new respect. But that's a separate matter. At this point, the protagonist coldly says, "Xuan Yuyan, you just said you would commission me at your own expense, right?" Xuan Yuyan is startled. "Ah, yes, then pay the commission fee now." Although he thinks Xuan Yuyan is nice, the protagonist can't accept freeloading. Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan nervously swallows. How much? Scene change. The two arrive at a restaurant. What is he doing? This question has been lingering in Xuan Yuyan's mind since arriving at the restaurant. With his identification skills, he would be welcomed anywhere. The hourly wage of a high-level analyst is a figure ordinary people wouldn't dare to imagine. Originally, Xuan Yuyan was prepared to be rejected when seeking his help. Who would have thought he would suddenly ask if she could pay now, and then only ask her to buy him lunch? Just thinking about how he had seriously said, "As long as you buy me lunch for 2 weeks, I'll help with the investigation," makes Xuan Yuyan break into a cold sweat. In the end, because she was too flustered, she absent-mindedly brought him to her regular small restaurant. "Is knife-cut noodles really okay?" Xuan Yuyan asks nervously. The protagonist happily replies, "These taste good." Xuan Yuyan can hardly believe there are awakened ones like this. Once people gain powerful abilities, they usually indulge in luxury. But he continues to live in such a shabby little room. However, Xuan Yuyan doesn't fully trust him. Perhaps he deliberately appears frugal to seem more like an F-rank hunter? For instance, during the kidnapping incident, why didn't he escape outside but instead stayed in the trafficker's boss's room? And why did he sneak into high-rank instances? In fact, there are many suspicious points. Thinking of these, Xuan Yuyan steals a glance at the person across the table with vigilant eyes. Why is everything going so smoothly? Since his identification ability became public, many have extended olive branches to him, but he ignored everything, yet chose to help me. Why? Although the situation is urgent, and she must temporarily seek his help, she absolutely won't let her guard down. Soon the protagonist finishes eating. Although it's deserved payment, having it all go into his own stomach still makes him feel a bit guilty, so he carefully observes the woman opposite. However, when Xuan Yuyan notices the protagonist staring at her, she nervously holds her breath. Meeting his gaze always brings an inexplicable pressure. Miss Xuan Yuyan, let's discuss business. What kind of instance needs investigating? The protagonist asks first. Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan remains silent for a moment, then says, there are terrorists in the instance. This simple statement startles the protagonist, who inadvertently shouts, terrorists! Xuan Yuyan quickly reminds him to keep his voice down. Then Xuan Yuyan begins to explain. Their methods are quite special. They don't use bombs or similar means for terror attacks, but Xuan Yuyan explains solemnly that someone has been deliberately triggering dungeon outbreaks. A dungeon outbreak refers to monsters escaping from dungeons. The spatial gates connecting to dungeons operate under a rule similar to timed explosives, usually lasting 7 to 10 days, or 3 to 5 days for smaller ones. If a dungeon is left unmanaged, the entrance, the spatial gate, will be destroyed and explode like a supernova, causing the dungeon to disappear, and all the monsters inside will pour out toward the city. This phenomenon is known as a dungeon outbreak, and it became the catalyst for humans to develop and explore dungeon technology. After hearing Xuan Yuyan's explanation, the protagonist frowns, surprised that someone would dare to do something so dangerous. He asks if anyone has actually caused a dungeon outbreak. Xuan Yuyan shakes her head, indicating she doesn't know as they've just begun investigating. But the protagonist has a question. If dungeons disappear after an outbreak, how can they investigate? This question is quickly answered by Xuan Yuyan. That's why she says the perpetrator left traces, because this time the dungeon didn't disappear. Recently, there was a large-scale outbreak of fire element monsters in the suburbs, but after the monsters escaped, the dungeon didn't vanish. A few days later, the protagonist arrives at a red spatial gate, which is the location Xuan Yuyan commissioned him to investigate. At the appointed time, Xuan Yuyan appears punctually with someone else. Xuan Yuyan tells the protagonist that this person will be going in with him as the supervisor. The protagonist curiously asks Xuan Yuyan about herself. She explains that she'll be waiting outside, as she's just a support with little combat ability. Xuan Yuyan informs the protagonist that this is a B-class dungeon, but there are no monsters left inside, so they can investigate safely. As the protagonist looks at the spatial gate, he can't help but feel a subtle sense of incongruity. Several hours later, after sweating through efforts in a lava zone, the protagonist finally achieves some results. After completing the investigation, the two exit the sweltering dungeon. Before Xuan Yuyan can ask about his findings, the protagonist hurriedly asks her for water. After emptying several bottles, he finally feels alive again. Xuan Yuyan, with cold sweat on her face, asks what he discovered. The protagonist's first words are, I have bad news for you. We probably won't be able to identify the perpetrator. Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan is startled and asks why. Because there are no clues to confirm identity, and the dungeon shows no signs of human manipulation. However, he found something strange. Pointing to the spatial gate behind him, he explains, this is a channel forcibly twisted open by an awakened one. Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan widens her eyes in surprise. If it's a forcibly open channel, so this is a fake exit? To summarize simply, the terrorist can open new entrances and exits in dungeons while also knowing how to close the original channels. Xuan Yuyan wonders why anyone would do such a thing. Perhaps for dungeon outbreaks? The protagonist indicates that's probably not the case. Through analyzing the dungeon, the protagonist has thought of several methods to trigger dungeon outbreaks, so he can responsibly say that the number of channels has nothing to do with the dungeon. At this point, the protagonist remembers something. Xuan Yuyan, you said this strange dungeon isn't the first, right? Xuan Yuyan explains while stroking her chin, this situation has occurred 3 times this year, with dungeons suddenly exploding before their time. Previous crimes left no evidence, but this time they deliberately left an empty dungeon to attract attention. What could be the purpose? Xuan Yuyan speculates that perhaps this time's criminal is not the same as those in previous cases. Although this guess is reasonable, it remains just speculation. Don't enter this dungeon again in the future, the protagonist warns Xuan Yuyan, pointing at the spatial gate surrounded by police tape. Xuan Yuyan doesn't understand why. The protagonist explains that this fake channel is highly unstable and will disappear within a day. Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan turns pale. Their only clue is about to vanish. The protagonist looks gravely at the spatial gate, realizing they must quickly find new clues. Soon after, the dungeon the protagonist warned Xuan Yuyan about indeed vanishes from the world. Thus, they lose their only lead to track the perpetrator. From that day on, the terror incidents also abruptly cease, and communication between the protagonist and Xuan Yuyan gradually diminishes. The bored protagonist stays at home scrolling through his phone. Recently, everyone is discussing one topic, a series of disappearances in Enping district with 7 victims, all ordinary people without magical power. Who would do this? Just as the protagonist ponders, A phone call suddenly rings. It's from Xuan Yuyan. The protagonist answers without hesitation, followed by a normal conversation. The call isn't long. Xuan Yuyan always likes to convey information clearly and concisely. The bad news is that with the Inping district disappearance case unfolding, Xuan Yuyan, with her search skills, has been appointed as an investigator, and the protagonist, who signed a 2-week contract with her, is now dragged into this matter. Scene transition. The protagonist successfully meets up with Xuan Yuyan and raises a doubt. If we're searching for missing persons, isn't Miss Xuan Yuyan's ability enough? How can I help? He has reason to suspect she's treating him as free labor. I was just about to tell you. I just used my ability on those missing persons, Xuan Yuyan says seriously. The results were very strange. I couldn't locate the first 2 people at all. When searching for the last person, my skill worked normally, but their location is underground. Hearing this, the protagonist is shocked. What? Could the missing person be buried alive? The serious crime is already apparent. But Xuan Yuyan's confusion doesn't end there. Her ability can only confirm a target's identity. She can track their location even if they're dead. Yet, for the first 2 cases, she couldn't even find coordinates, suggesting someone is deliberately interfering. So Xuan Yuyan suspects this is a trap set by the perpetrator. So you called me here to explore a trap, the protagonist comments accurately. Xuan Yuyan nervously explains, indeed, normally we wouldn't call an appraiser in such situations. I just thought having an active hunter would be safer. Hearing this, the protagonist almost laughs out loud. Active? I'm already an antique. Xuan Yuyan seems to hear the protagonist mumbling and asks, What did you say? The protagonist naturally changes the subject, saying it's nothing, as complaining to her wouldn't help anyway. Thus, they continue searching for the missing persons. Soon, Xuan Yuyan stops walking. Everyone, it's right here. The missing person is beneath our feet. If a missing person buried underground is motionless, there's only one possibility. Everyone falls into a brief silence. Quickly, this area is cordoned off. The police officers who were investigating separately all gather here. Then the police supervisor arranges one group to search the surroundings and another to start digging. Xuan Yuyan tells the protagonist to patrol the surroundings with her. Perhaps there might be more clues in the mountain. The protagonist asks curiously, don't you need to supervise the scene? My task is already complete. I've used up today's quota for my tracking ability. Xuan Yuyan explains, then gives a bitter smile. After tracking 3 times, I'm just a useless empty shell. An empty shell? The protagonist doesn't respond much to this statement. Nevertheless, the conversation continues. By the way, please tell me immediately if you find anything dangerous nearby. Although the protagonist is already scanning, he still nods, saying, there are no magical traps in this area. Xuan Yuyan laughs and says that's good. However, the next moment, she seems to notice something. She suddenly stops walking and says, Jinjili Hunter, please wait a moment. Hearing Xuan Yuyan's voice, the protagonist looks up. What? Xuan Yuyan points in a direction. See over there? Next to that tree, it looks like someone's standing there. The protagonist's eyesight isn't good, though it's better than when he lived in the deep sea in his previous life, but not by much. He can't see clearly what Xuan Yuyan is pointing at, so he simply scans the magical fluctuations in that area. Then, a human silhouette surrounded by faint magical power appears in his vision. There's an awakened one there, the protagonist explains. Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan is startled. An awakened one? Really? After confirmation, Xuan Yuyan hurriedly runs back to call for help. The protagonist is puzzled about who might be behind that tree. A hiker? Or someone related to this case? Though judging by magical power, they're only E-class, but they seem to be biting something. Just then, Xuan Yuyan returns with others. She points in a direction, saying, right there. The next moment, a change occurs. When the figure swallows whatever is in his mouth, his originally E-class power suddenly surges. Feeling the magical flow from the opposite side, the protagonist suddenly realizes something is wrong. Wait, could this person's target be? He turns abruptly to look aside, then shouts at Xuan Yuyan, move back! He reaches out toward Xuan Yuyan, intending to push her away. But it's too late, the awakened one has already released their ability. Although the protagonist realizes what's happening, his sluggish body can't keep up. So the protagonist simply tells Xuan Yuyan not to panic. Xuan Yuyan asks why. Because we're about to fall. As the protagonist finishes speaking, a strong sense of freefall quickly spreads throughout their bodies. On the spot, a blue portal opens like a beast's huge mouth, instantly swallowing everything at their location. After a long fall, they land in a small lake. The protagonist, who was a marine creature in his previous life, lies expressionlessly on the water's surface, feeling as if his back nearly shattered. Xuan Yuyan can't swim and calls for help. Another police officer who fell with them rushes to rescue her. Soon, Xuan Yuyan is saved from the water, though she seems to have swallowed quite a bit. The officer anxiously calls her name while pressing on her abdomen. Finally, Xuan Yuyan coughs up water. The officer relaxes, turning to ask the protagonist, who has climbed ashore, what happened? Did they fall into a dungeon? Then he receives a confirmation from the protagonist. 3 people are caught in this incident: Xuan Yuyan, a D-class police officer, and the protagonist. Unfortunately, the police chief didn't fall in. At this moment, the blue light pouring from above suddenly disappears. The dungeon entrance has closed. Could it be that terrorist? Now the protagonist finally roughly understands the outline of the Enping district disappearance cases. His head feels chaotic. He needs to calm down first and clarify the current situation. Regrettably, he isn't even given that time. Two heads appear from behind rocks not far from them. Are you hunters? The officer is startled. My God, the missing persons. You're the missing high school students, right? The children run out crying. Yes, we survived. They throw themselves into the officer's arms. You're here to save us, right? Officer, please get us out of here. 6 people were brought here. The others all died. Only we 2 are still alive, the surviving high schoolers say tearfully. The officer is momentarily stunned, then puts on a reliable expression. Don't worry, just wait a moment. He takes out a portable analyzer. The basic information of the dungeon appears. Dungeon name, Istanbul's winter, level, B class. B class dungeon, that's quite high level. But the situation isn't too bad, because there's an awakened one here who can fight monsters. The protagonist tells them to calm down, explaining that there aren't many monsters here, and a B-class hunter can clear the dungeon. After speaking, the protagonist walks towards Xuan Yuyan. Miss Xuan Yuyan, let's start hunting. There might be a new exit. However, when he sees her face clearly, the protagonist is suddenly speechless. Finally, he calls out softly, Miss Xuan Yuyan? She seems not to hear the protagonist's words. After a while, she trembles and says, let me out, I can't stay here. Please take me away from here. Communication is completely impossible. She even starts scratching her arms with her fingernails. Her eyes are filled with terror. From childhood, Xuan Yuyan had always lived a very ordinary life, but she was content with it, getting up in the morning for school, helping her parents manage the tea plantation after class. Xuan Yuyan especially loved the emerald tea fields. Her parents didn't want their daughter to do the hard farm work and urged her to go play with friends. However, young Xuan Yuyan said she preferred picking tea leaves. In short, whenever she had time, she diligently helped her parents. It was a peaceful day like any other. But that day, peace was broken. A red spatial gate suddenly appeared, and a monster bird flew out from inside. Xuan Yuyan and her mother were both terrified and trembling. However, faced with the monster rushing towards Xuan Yuyan, her mother didn't hesitate to throw her behind herself. Then the monster bird bit her mother. For his wife, her father rushed up without hesitation. The monster bird, carrying her mother, flew into the shining red channel, and her father, fearlessly gripping the monster's claws, was taken in too. Then the portal, appearing only briefly, closed. That day, dungeon outbreaks occurred simultaneously around the world. From that day on, Xuan Yuyan's life became fragmented. Also on that day, Xuan Yuyan, having lost both parents, awakened as a B-class hunter. However, Xuan Yuyan could never return to that emerald tea plantation. Back to the present, the protagonist gently pats Xuan Yuyan's back. Xuan Yuyan, can you hear me? He originally thought having a B-class hunter would ensure safety, but now things have taken an unexpected turn. The only awakened one capable of fighting monsters here happens to suffer from dungeon panic disorder. Why didn't he realize this earlier? After all, only 7 years have passed since the first dungeon outbreak. During this period, countless lives have been lost. Some people have moved on from the grief of losing loved ones, while others still remain immersed in pain. Looking at Xuan Yuyan's rapid breathing, the protagonist knows that if he can't calm her down, everyone will die. Xuan Yuyan, deep breath, the protagonist says, patting her shoulder. From now on, I'll count to 3, and you'll slowly calm down. 1, 2, 3. Truthfully, this is almost a life-risking act. If Xuan Yuyan feels threatened and strikes back, his body would instantly be decomposed. Fortunately, the worst doesn't happen. After hearing the protagonist count, Xuan Yuyan quickly returns to normal breathing. The protagonist carefully observes her complexion. Though still pale, she can clearly communicate now. If you're calmer now, listen to me. This is a B-class dungeon, but this police officer is only D-class, and I'm F-class, so only you can truly deal with those monsters. The protagonist tells Xuan Yuyan she's their only hope. However, Xuan Yuyan buries her head in her knees, sobbing, No, I can't do it. Why not? You can hunt outside, right? Like the Ficino SS when we first met, the protagonist questions. But Xuan Yuyan says, that was C-class. I've never fought monsters of my own level. Xuan Yuyan asks if the protagonist can help. He tells her to calm down and emphasizes that he's only F-class. But Xuan Yuyan just thinks he's lying. Why are you doing this to me? Help me, please help me. Xuan Yuyan's voice gets increasingly louder. The protagonist is speechless. She thinks I'm faking my level? Even though she was in charge of the test, why won't she believe? You know I can only search. What do you want me to do? Xuan Yuyan cries out, tears silently falling. Regrettably, the protagonist isn't moved at all. Can you really not do anything? If you don't step up, everyone here will die. I really can't do it. Xuan Yuyan wails miserably. However, the protagonist pats her shoulder. Pull yourself together, Xuan Yuyan. Your awakened ability isn't some search power. Your true awakening is wind type, isn't it? On this planet completely enveloped by atmosphere, what awakened one is as powerful as you? So Xuan Yuyan had been concealing her true attribute all along. She is fundamentally an atmospheric manipulation mage. The protagonist knew this from their first meeting but never mentioned it. Xuan Yuyan looks at the protagonist incredulously and asks, How do you know? Then she explains she hasn't been lying. The protagonist doesn't understand what she means, and then hears Xuan Yuyan say she simply can't use her abilities, her awakened power doesn't work. It turns out that the monster that killed her parents 7 years ago was a wind-controlling creature, and ironically, she awakened with the same ability as the monster. So whenever Xuan Yuyan tries to use her skill, that memory surfaces in her mind, making it impossible for her to use her power. Hearing this, the protagonist is stunned. In his hometown, there were no such cases. Psychological issues preventing magic use? This is completely a beginner's trait. After pondering for a moment, the protagonist softens his tone. Hunter Xuan Yuyan, from my perspective, there's nothing wrong with your body. That is to say, you can use your abilities anytime you make up your mind. You're the strongest hunter of your class and can easily handle the monsters here. Trust me, the protagonist says firmly. However, despite this, Xuan Yuyan still hesitates. Can I really do it? Deep down, she doesn't believe the protagonist at all. If he's not F-class, why is he standing by doing nothing? As the two reach an impasse, a sudden scream is heard. They look toward the sound, only to see a monster flying out from the dark cave. The damp cave, the monster with spread wings. This scene is exactly like the accident 7 years ago. In an instant, Xuan Yuyan recalls the fear of being dominated by monsters. She's so scared that she trembles all over, unable to move. Miss Xuan Yuyan, run away! The protagonist shouts at Xuan Yuyan. Seeing no response from her, the protagonist finally chooses to give up. Those who are meant to live will survive anyway. But the problem is this monster's behavioral pattern. Why ignore the people standing still, yet specifically target him? To make matters worse, the protagonist trips over a rock and falls. Then the monster catches up to him and assumes an attacking posture. Finally, trapped in a desperate situation, the protagonist shouts, Hunter Xuan Yuyan, help me! But Xuan Yuyan, gripped by panic, doesn't hear his voice. However, the following scene jolts her awake. Her mind, trapped in chaos, is brutally pulled back to reality. Blood splatters in the air as the flying monster's tail pierces the man's shoulder like a hook. Even from a distance, the sound of shoulder blade cracking is clearly audible. At this moment, a strong thought flashes in Xuan Yuyan's mind. What's happening? Could it be that he wasn't hiding his level and really is just an F-class weakling? Confusion suddenly strikes. What should I do? If this continues, that monster will escape with its prey, drag it into the deep cave and kill him cruelly, just like how her loved ones died. That terrible scene from that day once again overlaps with reality. At this moment, her heart suddenly erupts in sharp pain. Enough! Xuan Yuyan angrily shouts. With her roar, a gust of wind rises from nowhere. It's Xuan Yuyan unconsciously releasing magic due to the huge impact of the scene before her. That's the power she wanted to use to protect her parents 7 years ago. The airflow transforms into blades, effortlessly tearing through the B-class monster's steel-like body as if cutting paper. Xuan Yuyan kills the B-class monster with just a wave of her hand. But before she can rejoice, she immediately rushes forward because the protagonist is falling. Finally, Xuan Yuyan makes a fierce dash, catching the protagonist in a princess carry. Having successfully saved him, Xuan Yuyan heaves a sigh of relief. She places the protagonist on the ground, anxiously asking, "Are you okay? What should I do?" She frantically searches herself only to realize she doesn't have any recovery potion. However, the protagonist, who has just escaped death, first says, "Miss Xuan Yuyan, you just used your skill. I told you could do it. Thanks to you, I'm alive." Hearing this, Xuan Yuyan silently sheds tears. Reality is completely different from her daily nightmares. With this power, she can finally save others. Even in confusion, this fact leaves a deep impression in her heart. Just then, the police officer who fled with the two children returns. Seeing the protagonist's miserable state, he asks worriedly if he's alright. Xuan Yuyan immediately asks the officer if he has emergency tools. Unfortunately, the officer says he doesn't. The protagonist surveys the scene, then quietly sits up. The officer warns him not to move around, but the protagonist says it's fine, and asks everyone to step aside as he needs to take off his clothes to use recovery potion. He says he has recovery potion. Xuan Yuyan looks at the protagonist skeptically. With a hole in his body, yet showing such calmness, it seems excessive. Xuan Yuyan secretly suspects this person might be too severely injured and has lost his senses.